Good morning and afternoon, and welcome to Africa Week. My name is Valeria Bertacco, and I am a faculty member in the Computer Science Department at the University of Michigan, and the Vice Provost for Engaged Learning. Within my research field, I have developed several collaborations with African institutions on both teaching and research, which account for the happiest and most fulfilling collaborations in my career. First, I wish to thank all of our partners in Africa, collaborators and friends of the University of Michigan for making Africa Week possible. My closest partners in organizing this event have been Andris Koitsi, whom you will meet tomorrow morning, and Brody Remington, who you will meet on Friday's closing. Over the past 8 months, we've become the closest of friends, especially since in this part of the world, it is almost impossible to maintain a social life anymore. And finally, a special thank you to the inspiring Provost Advisory Committee who brainstormed with us, discussed ideas, and most importantly, helped us understand that this event was the right step forward. I miss seeing them all in person. So yesterday, we had the opportunity to participate in exciting discussions about Africa's economic development trajectory with Dr. Vera Songwe, Undersecretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and Provost Susan Collins, Provost of the University of Michigan. In one of her remarks, Dr. Songwe shared that the pandemic has increased indeed the attention by African leaders on STEM and African scientists. That is a very good sign for us because here we are today at Africa Week's Technology Day. The focus of today's conversation will address the critical role that technology plays in many aspects of life, from advancing a country's economic development to providing service to its population, to opportunities to stay connected and improve life experiences. Later today, we will join a panel on transportation and future opportunities in the African context, especially as it relates to moving people and goods efficiently. Indeed, the efficient movement of goods is a necessary precursor of reaping the benefit of the African Free Trade Agreement that Susan and Vera discussed yesterday. The other panel for today is on computing, and computing is one of the most portable and transferable of technologies, as it doesn't require expensive labs nor equipment. In light of these features, what can computing do to support the economic development and connectivity of people and businesses across the African continent? And what can we do as educators to accelerate the education of a new class of computing experts and computing researchers that can lead this revolution? The discussion will be later in the morning. But before we dive into the technology panels, we will have our featured fireside chat this morning. Our own Dean of Engineering at the University of Michigan, Alec Gallimore, will sit down with Dr. Patrick Awa, founder and president of Ashesi University, to discuss how technology could enable a leap ahead in social economic development in communities across the entire planet, and how to educate a next generation of technology leaders who are grounded in strong ethical and leadership values so that they will enable future technology revolutions. Before I pass the microphone to our speakers, let me introduce them briefly. Dr. Alec Gallimore is a Dean of Engineering at the University of Michigan and a faculty member in our Aerospace Engineering department. He became Dean in 2016 after serving in several leadership roles at the University of Michigan. The College of Engineering at the University of Michigan, founded in 1854, is one of the premier engineering schools in the United States, with over 10,000 graduate and undergraduate students, offering 17 undergraduate degree programs and over 40 master's and PhD degrees. The college is home to over 15 major student project teams, several are ranking among the top performing teams nationally, including the Solar Car team, Off-Road, and Electric Racing teams, the Mars Rover team, and the M-Fly team, which is an aircraft design team. Dr. Gallimore's research interests explore the propulsion and thruster solution that will allow humans to travel in interplanetary space more efficiently. Dr. Gallimore holds a bachelor's degree from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and a master and PhD degree in aerospace engineering from Princeton University. He's a fellow of the American Institute of Astronautics and Aeronautics and a member of the National Academy of Engineering. Dr. Patrick Awa is the founder and the president of Ashesi University. He's our guest speaker today. Ashesi University is located in Accra, Ghana. Ashesi University is a private, not-for-profit institution founded in 1999. It has quickly gained a reputation for innovation and quality education in Ghana and across the African continent. Before founding Ashesi University, Patrick worked for Microsoft, where, among other things, he spearheaded the development of dial-up internet and gained a reputation for bringing difficult projects to completion. And here he was again, founding Ashesi University and making another successful project that was very challenging. Dr. Awa grew up in Ghana and moved to the United States to attend Swarthmore College, from which he holds bachelor degrees in engineering and economics. He later also obtained an MBA from UC Berkeley. He also holds honorary degree doctorates from Swarthmore College and from Babson College. Dr. Awa's work and contribution to our education and to his home country is being acknowledged worldwide. He received the Order of the Volta Award in 2007 to recognize his contribution to tertiary education in Ghana. In 2009, Dr. Awa won the John McNulty Prize. And in 2010, he was recognized as one of the world's most creative business persons by Fast Company. In 2014, he was named the best social entrepreneur by Schwab Foundation for social entrepreneurship. In 2015, Dr. Award was awarded the MacArthur Fellowship. And in 2017, he was awarded the World Innovation Summit of Education Prize, a major global education award. As we join our conversation, please feel free to enter your question throughout the discussion by clicking in the Q&A button at the bottom of your window. And with that, I would like to welcome our Fireside guests. Take it on.
Thank you, Valeria. It's great to be here, and it's wonderful to be with you, Patrick. How are you doing today?
I'm well. How are you?
Great.
How are you, Patrick?
I'd like to start off with a question that I think a lot of our listeners here in Michigan are wondering. What's the weather like where you are?
It's warm here, sunny and warm. I have my air conditioning on.
Wow. Well, there's a snowstorm going on right here. It's quite wintry. And this highlights the amazing magic of technology that allows us to be co-located, even though we're clearly in different parts of the globe. So let me start by asking a question that I'm curious about. I'm sure many of our listeners are and watchers are too. What's a typical day for you as president of such a young and unique university?
Right. So my day today these days is a little different than the norm, right? As you might imagine, because of COVID-19. But I'll just most of it is online, right? Because of COVID. But I will sort of answer the question, sort of a blend of before COVID and now. My day begins with a morning workout. You have to stay fit. I go to work and I'm involved in a series of meetings over the course of the day. And this is for me different today than it was in the very early days when I was the entrepreneur and I was very hands-on on a lot of things. Now most of my work is working with teams of people and committees. And I would say that at the university, a few key meetings that I have that are very important. Obviously, my weekly meeting with my senior leadership team. There's a campus development team. We're on a campus that's been under construction for 10 years now, right? It's a new campus, finance committee, but also meetings with the head of student government weekly. So there's that sort of those engagements that I do. And then I also have occasionally travel, right? So I'm traveling, visiting with donors, I'm traveling, speaking at conferences and so on. And all of that travel is now currently grounded. So it's all virtual, not flying around in airplanes and sleeping in hotels and so on. That's my typical day.
Wow. I love the idea of starting off with a workout. I understand that, the importance of that. Why did you start Ashesi University? What was the motivation for starting the university in the first place?
So the motivation, I should say that when I decided to return to Ghana, a university was not my first idea. My first idea was setting up a software company. But I decided to do a university instead because I realized after many conversations with friends and family here that a fundamental problem that we had was a problem of leadership that was willing to challenge the status quo and act to change the status quo and to drive forward, and leadership that was creative. And so, and I felt that the leaders of our country were among the 5% of the time who had a chance to go get a college education. And so if we could change the way education was done, which is very rote-based, to something that was more geared towards critical thinking and problem solving, and that was grounded in the deep, important conversations about, what the good society is and what is desirable, what is beauty, what kind of society do we want and how do we want to act to create that? So decided that I could set up a university that would serve as an example to others and hopefully change the educational system to something different that would put out the leaders that would change our country fast forward 20, 30 years.
That's great. Let me ask about maybe a typical day of a student in a university, let's say pre-pandemic. Let's not, this is such an unusual time. How might she experience her day on campus versus, and contrasting maybe how another student might experience her day at another university, and understanding how you designed this university to provide that kind of education more grounded in the thought of critical thinking versus rote?
Right. So I would say that the big differences would be that a student at Ashesi, when she or he walked into a classroom, would be engaging with the faculty differently. So the faculty at Ashesi are not people who are pouring knowledge into the heads of their students. They're really more like guides, right? So they are sort of guiding students on a journey of inquiry and discovery. So that's one big difference. The second is that they would be engaged in a variety of disciplines. So they would be, a computer science student might still be required to take a course in finance, a course in history or African philosophy. A business major would be required to take a course in programming, for example. So there's sort of this multidisciplinary approach to their education that they wouldn't find elsewhere in country. But I think that the most important thing or the biggest difference is that they would also be working in a community of trust, right? So our students have this honor system where they basically pledge to us that they would hold to certain ideals individually as well as corporately. So they would hold each other to account. And that we can trust them, right? So we don't have to look over their shoulders during exams and so on. And this is dramatically different than what their peers would experience in other classrooms and exam rooms in the country.
Wow, amazing. Now at Swarthmore, I know you studied economics, but you also studied engineering, computer science, if you will. How did your technical background in engineering equip you for the current role you have?
Well, you think about, two things, right? You think about what an engineer does. Engineers are trained or educated to see problems, right? Take those problems apart and solve them, right? So in a way, they're trained to look at the status quo and question it, imagine something different, and design a solution to that with that new thing that they've imagined, right? So they're problem solvers and they're creators. The other thing is engineers are systems thinkers. They tend to think, yes, you break problems apart, but in solving the problem, you really do think about an entire system and how it interacts within itself and how it interacts with the external environment, right? And I think that both of those attributes have served me well. The ability to problem solve, the ability to think in a systematic way, I think has been very, very important to my work. And I would also say that it's been helpful to know math and be comfortable with quantitative reasoning.
Yeah, that's terrific. I find, and I'm just curious if you find this as well, I, of course, an engineer as well, and I have the same sort of problem solving systems approach, et cetera. And sometimes I think people from different disciplines kind of bristle a little bit about it. They have a different point of view in terms of how they do things, which makes the university life just wonderful. Did you find that when you were starting university, and how do you continue to navigate just the different ways people think and go about, if you will, achieving a certain outcome?
Well, let me say that when we started and we presented a radically different curriculum to the National Accreditation Board of Ghana, we got some pushback. This is very different. Why are you teaching philosophy to engineers? Or why are you doing this, that, and the other? And, my approach was, okay, I need to solve this problem of the resistance that I'm getting. And I need to do it carefully. I need to do it with grace, right? And I need to try and come up with a beautiful solution, right? Simple, beautiful solution. And for me, that involved doing things like hiring people onto my team that were respected here. So they were seeing a face, they were seeing faces around me and people around me that they could connect with, but also taking the time to explain what it is we're doing, and explaining that, we were willing to make corrections and change design if we found errors in our design, which is what engineers are comfortable. Actually, it's one of the things about engineering is you sort of get comfortable with the idea of recognizing failures in things that you have built and correcting those failures. And so being able to talk about that in a very authentic way, I think helps that conversation. And then also translating, so one of the questions we had about the liberal arts core to our curriculum about humanities and social sciences, pointing out that, there's a piece of our curriculum that they all loved, which was our community service requirement, right? So everyone in the accreditation board that we met liked the idea that we were requiring our students to go out in the community and do projects. And so taking that, which I knew they loved, and saying, that is the laboratory for the humanities and social sciences. The reason why we're doing the humanities and social sciences as part of our curriculum is because it enables a kind of thinking and a kind of approach that is about questioning, why are you doing something? What is the purpose? What ought to be? And then that would inform the service projects that students would do. And I think all of that really helped sort of overcome some of that particular resistance that we encountered.
Fascinating, very true. I'd love to, one of the things I want to understand is what makes you excited about your university? What do you see as a special element? But as part of that answer, I'd love to hear, how did you recruit faculty members in such a different teaching environment and different mission?
Right. Well, the thing that makes me excited about my work every day is that I see young people who are really switched on. And I think that our approach of saying, our education is about, lighting up the mind rather than pouring information to a mind, is really working very well. And we see our students going off and doing some really incredible things as students and later on as alumni. So I get that's what excites me about the work that I do. Your second question, remind me so I get it right.
About how did you recruit faculty members and staff
Recruiting
members?
faculty.
Yeah, in particular.
The first semester, before our first semester, when we put out job ads, we got 0 applications from Ghanaian faculty. We had no one interested because this was new. Private universities were very new in our country. And they were seeing a 37-year-old at the time who was starting a university. They really didn't believe that I could do what I said I was going to do. And so the first faculty we hired came from the UK and the United States. So we hired a couple of people from the UK, and we had some visiting faculty who had taken sort of a leave of absence from Microsoft to come and teach. And that was our first semester. And then once we got started and we were off the ground, then we got more interest from local faculty as well. And we've sort of taken the approach of really actively trying to recruit from the diaspora. So Ghanaians and other Africans who are in the UK or the US, and encouraging them to come home and demonstrating that they would be entering an environment similar to what they're used to out there in terms of the sort of the pedagogical approach of our university, as well as recruiting locally. And we really screen for a fit of culture, a fit of purpose. We ask all faculty members, once they've gone through the screening of, reviewing the teaching philosophy statements, interviewing them and so on, we have them actually teach a class with students, and we see how they do in the classroom and how they engage with students, so that they understand that teaching is important to us as much or more than their scholarship. I mean, research is important to us as well, but we really want to sort of drive home the point that engaging these young minds is really important. And then we make a decision to hire based on all of that review. That's how we're recruiting our faculty. And right now, I think we have a very healthy mix of people who've returned from the diaspora, people who've been working here already, and visiting faculty from mostly from the United States, but also a few from Europe.
Wow, amazing, great. I want to shift a little bit and talk about the role of technology and economic development. As you know, in your days back in Microsoft, I mean, technology has just been such a huge engine of economic development in the United States. How do you think about the role of technology and economic growth in Ghana and other African countries?
Technology is a multiplier. It's a multiplier of everything that we do. And those societies that most intensely use technology have the strongest economies. One thing I find fascinating is that the countries that have the most robots per capita also have the lowest unemployment rates. And, certainly technology is going to be an enabler here as well, and a multiplier here as well, in just about every aspect of our economy, every aspect of our society. So you name it, infrastructure, power, transport, roads, water distribution, running our businesses, running hospitals, running schools, everything that we do, agriculture, is going to be made better and more productive by the use of technology. And so that's the role that I see. It's a multiplier, and it's a way to achieve efficiencies and also increase productivity.
I mean, you have such an amazing vantage point of having spent a large amount of time in the United States and a large amount of time in Africa. Do you see some surprising advantages Ghana has, and maybe other African countries have, for adoption of technology that maybe some of our viewers here in the United States might be surprised to hear about?
Well, the one that everyone talks about is, we had such a critical problem with telecommunications infrastructure on the continent, and that problem we overcame with mobile technology, mobile telephony, right? One of the things that people don't really think about in Africa versus other parts of the world, one big difference. If you come to Africa, and if you were to try and travel from Ghana to Nigeria, which is in West Africa, or from Ghana to Nairobi in East Africa, the road network would not be the most efficient way to do it. We don't have that sort of strong interstate highway system that you see all over the world. And when you're traveling from cities from one side of the continent to another, or just generally across borders, air transport is the fastest, most efficient, right? And so I think that, in Africa, there's going to be, I think we're going to have to reckon with the idea that we need to come up with efficient sort of short haul and long haul air transportation. We're going to have to look at how we maintain aircraft here on the continent rather than sending them elsewhere for maintenance. So that's one thing that I would say people don't really think about. But the problem is in everything, in all kinds of transport. And I would say that one thing I find very interesting, by the way, Alec, you're sort of working in an area which is about interplanetary transport, right? And you're not burning hydrocarbons to do that. Right. The source of power is different. And I think that there's a real promise there that much of the economic growth that needs to happen in Africa is yet to happen. I mean, for us to catch up economically with the rest of the world is going to require massive economic growth, massive infrastructure development. And there's a real opportunity for us to do it with cleaner technologies, right? So things that are not, putting carbon into the atmosphere, for example. And so electrifying our vehicles, the improvements in storage of electricity, whether it's in batteries or hydrogen, those things could become real game changers in Africa and present some real opportunities that we should be looking at.
Sounds great. And what is the role of education, but maybe specifically universities like Ashese in terms of contributing to that technological development in Africa?
It's a combination of training and preparing the engineers that we need, people who are going to create new technologies for our context, who are going to take existing technology and adapt it to our context. And people who are going to, and of course, all of this requires the ability to connect with other cultures and really be able to reach across our borders and learn from others, and also connect with each other on the continent across internal borders here on the continent. So it's a combination of effective teaching and research that needs to occur here. And I would say that if I were to advise our government in terms of their research expenditures, that when you think about R&D, we should probably start with more the D part of that equation of really looking at, leveraging fundamental research that's been done elsewhere and developing it for our purposes. And I think the universities and research institutions have a role to play here.
Great. Should I say, sounds a little bit like Olin College here, a small engineering college here. And I will tell you that Michigan Engineering emulates Olin in terms of trying to have a hands-on experiential learning. Has the HESE had similar influence in Ghana at other institutions, or even have other universities in other countries in Africa popped up or modified their operations to simulate what you've achieved at your university?
We've started to see some of that. We've started to see, some of the major universities in Ghana now starting up entire programs to really focus on how they do better at critical thinking. And we've set up a project, we call it the Education Collaborative, and we have about, I think, 140 universities and colleges from around the continent that work with us in workshops around pedagogy and ways of doing things. And we're starting to see some interest, and we're seeing some universities adapting what we've done to their institutions.
Great. Now, just some advice maybe to us here. What is that academic institutions, for example, our College of Engineering, what could we do to do a better job in boosting our exchange programs, partnerships, and things of that nature, so that there's a better interchange of the flow of talent, students, faculty members, et cetera, collaborations? What advice do you have for us?
So I'm going to say one of the things that I think, by the way, I think that the U.S. universities and colleges already do a pretty good job of getting their students to travel and see other cultures and engage with other universities. One thing that I find missing in their engagement in Africa is that, and some of it is completely understandable, by the way. So usually when a student from the United States is coming to Africa, they want to come and do African studies. So they want to do things to do with our culture and our history and so on, which is completely understandable. It's something they can get done better here than elsewhere. But it would be really, really terrific if they could also come and do some of the same subjects that they're doing in their home institutions here in this context, right? And so, if you're a computer science major coming and working alongside computer science majors here actually adds to the experience of engaging with African students. And I think that this is the one area that I would say US universities should be more intentional about. So students, when they come here, don't do 100% of their engagement is around African culture, but it's around African culture and medicine, African culture and public health, African culture and engineering, whatever it is that they're interested in. Doing some of that here would actually give them a much deeper appreciation of what's going on here, what the opportunities are here, and how they engage with their peers moving forward in their careers.
One question that one of our viewers is asking is examples of achievements from students from your university, in particular things like entrepreneurship, innovation, and social impact.
All right, so just a few off the top of my head that I'll say. There are alumni who started software companies and have been instrumental in working on mobile money, and one of the mobile money platforms that our students worked on has become really dominant in this country. We have students who've worked on, or alumni who've worked on our electoral systems, so the biometric systems that we use in our elections, which have really strengthened the electoral system here in Ghana. And we've seen students do a wide variety of things. There are alumni who are heading major, treasury and financial institutions and banks, who've led peacekeeping squads, who are, guiding our country, Bank of Ghana, in cybersecurity and all sorts of things like that. So I see our alumni really very engaged in some very meaningful ways that are making big impacts here.
Right. Yeah, going back to the Olin analogy, one of the things that makes Olin and frankly, University of Michigan strong is the notion of the entrepreneurial ethos, if you will. And I'm just wondering, how has HESE promoted the notion of entrepreneurism, namely creation of startups and things of that nature? And how does that work in Ghana? Maybe the confluence of academia, government, startups, and large companies, sort of what we call sort of the brain belt phenomenon, if you will. How does that work in Ghana?
Right. So I'll talk about what we do at HESE first. So for us, entrepreneurship is really about, what I talked about earlier about not even challenging, questioning the status quo, coming up with new ideas and designs, and having the courage to go implement and persist in developing those ideas. And that can be either in a startup or it can be in an existing institution. So you can be entrepreneuring in an established company, right? So it's more about the mindset that we're trying to develop. And the way we do it at HESE is very much experiential, just as everything else that we do. So one of the first courses that students take at HESE is a course called Foundations of Design and Entrepreneurship. And it's a two-part course that starts with design thinking and ends with coming up with a business idea, usually a micro business that can run on campus. And we have these micro businesses running on campus, run by freshmen, right, in their first year, right? And so they get this experience that's about trying to think end to end about the process of designing something that is meeting a need, prototyping it, iterating it through customer feedback, implementing it, working in a team, sometimes difficult team dynamics, trying to make the finances work and all of that. And that serves as a base experience that they can sort of reflect on as they go through the rest of their curriculum at HESE. And then in their fourth year, they do a capstone, and the capstone can be a design project or a thesis or a business plan for an actual business they're going to develop. Now, between the first year and the final year, we have a D lab that they go and continue to prototype ideas. That's all co-curricular stuff that they do. We have a venture fund that we've set up that supports some of that work, prototyping through grants. And then we have a business incubator for some of the best ideas after the fourth year to actually get started on campus. And so we sort of try to build this ecosystem within the university to really drive this entrepreneuring mind. Now, once all of that is done, we know that most of them are still going to go get a job in a company that's already running and be entrepreneuring there. But we hope that after that, they might, get back to actually doing a startup themselves, right? After they've had that experience of working in the corporate world. Now, the ecosystem broadly in Ghana has some significant challenges or differences from, say, Silicon Valley, for example. So in Silicon Valley, you've got Stanford, you've got UC Berkeley close by, but you've got Sand Hill Road. You've got these venture capitalists who are taking significant risks on great ideas. And you've also got friends and family funding, which can be quite significant in the United States. Here, we don't have significantly the friends and family funding that would enable scalable businesses, nor do we have a strong venture capital ecosystem here. And so this is a challenge that entrepreneurs deal with here. And so a lot of entrepreneurs, including those who are trying to build scalable businesses, are forced to go get a job, and then they try to bootstrap their idea as sort of a side gig, right, that they do next to their job, right? and then get traction that way. And once they have sufficient traction and cash flows, they can go get a bank loan, right? But this is sort of a very long way. It drags out. You don't have that sort of high risk capital that's easily accessible. And this is something that, I'm optimistic that over time we'll get it, but it's definitely a challenge today for entrepreneurs.
Is there a role global partnerships could play in terms of accelerating that process from, say, the bootstrapping mode, which takes forever, to this more traditional American entrepreneurship mode of friends, family, angel, and then various rounds of VC type funding to accelerate that process, do you think?
Yes, there have been a number of attempts at this, right? And so there are some foundations that have tried to do this. There's also, patient capital, organizations that are trying to be sort of the VCs of developing world. They tend to, though, because of their core mission, they tend to limit the kinds of business that they will fund to businesses that they can immediately tell are pro-poor, right? So these are businesses that are serving the needs of the poor from the get-go, right?
Yeah.
And that can be limiting because sometimes scalable businesses start not from addressing the poor, but by aiming for people who can afford it and who can eventually get you the volume so that you can become bigger, right? So there's a bit of there's something a little sticky about that approach right now, which is not enabling certain kinds of business. And if you think about it, if the investments into mobile telephony in Africa had said, okay, we're only funding pro-poor projects, they wouldn't have funded telephone companies building networks, right?
Yeah.
The first people to use mobile phones were middle class before it sort of took off. And so we do need to find a way to get that kind of capital into our economies.
Interesting. A couple of questions have come in about related to curricula. One is maybe a little bit more discussion about how you expose students to design thinking in general throughout the curriculum. That's one question.
Well, as I said, there's a course on design thinking. We have faculty who specialize in this, and they sort of go through the process of what design thinking is and how to sort of apply it, right? And in our case, we want people to think about what is the problem they're trying to solve, who's the customer, what is the need. They should think about that early on in the cycle of designing, and they should, as much as possible, co-design with the end user that they have in mind, right? So that's I know is a big emphasis in the way we're teaching design thinking at Ashesi. But it's that one course that they do, and then as they get through the rest of their courses, so for engineering students, they also have their first engineering course is one where they're actually building a system right away. So they might be given a project to go build, go build a robotic arm or something like this, and they're applying those principles there as well.
Great. Now I want to hearken to something that Valeria said about how, because of the relatively low need for capital expenditures associated with data science and computer science. In other words, somebody's spending the money on hardware, but it doesn't have to be necessarily practitioners. One of our viewers asked a question about the role of computer science, maybe with a focus on data science and AI as part of the technological engine for economic development in Africa. Just want to get your thoughts about that.
Well, I do think, well, everywhere you go, people are studying AI, right? And that's true for us as well. And you're right that, you know, relatively, you know, it doesn't take as much money to write code, but you need a relatively simple machine, and it's really all about your knowledge and applying that. So there's definitely a role there. I also think that a lot of companies are going to become or have significant software development functions within their companies, right? So it doesn't matter now anymore what business you are. Any sort of large business in its work will need to have programmers and data scientists on their staff to help with decision support, and also to help with improving efficiencies. And it's going to be everywhere, right? So the water company is going to deploy AI to help with, you know, seeing what's happening in the quality of the water that they're distributing to everybody. The banks are going to have AI. You know, it's going to be everywhere, right? So I completely agree with that point, and it's something that we've, with the help of faculty from Dartmouth College, we added, and Carnegie Mellon, we added artificial intelligence and robotics into our CS curriculum for this reason, as well as data science.
Wow, that's great.
Data analytics.
Okay, wow. That's wonderful to hear. You mentioned water, and I know we're running out of time, but I wanted to ask, you know, the last time I was in Africa, the notion of water came up as a, if you will, lifeblood for humanity. And I wanted, you know, we're in the Great Lakes area, we have a lot of fresh water here. Get some thoughts from you about the water challenges in Africa and maybe opportunities to address them.
Right. So in Ghana, in a lot of communities, the source of water, of clean water, is wells, boreholes. So we're sort of getting groundwater is the source for many, many communities. The water mains in the cities are limited. We don't have water mains in the villages, the rural areas. And so this is the challenge that we have. We now, of course, you know, when you dig up water, when you pump up water from the ground, you still need to be treating it. You need to be getting certain minerals out of it. You don't want excess iron or manganese or other things. You need to be testing for safety of that water as well. And I think there's a real opportunity for us to do a better job of doing that testing and cleaning of that water, making it fully safe. And there's a tremendous amount of work to be done in piping that water into households, especially in the rural areas, because right now it's community wells that everybody goes to, right? They don't have running water into their homes. And so this is a big challenge that we need to address.
Well, Dr. Patrick Awa, a real pleasure. It was very nice to get to meet with you and to talk to you about these really important matters. I'll be turning over to Valeria, but before that, we're going to be entering a break until 9:30, and then the next panel will be the role of computing in Africa's economic future, and it's really important. Please do not disconnect from Zoom. Please don't. Valeria.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much, President Awa, and thank you, Dean Gallimore, for the engaging discussion this morning. It's been a pleasure to participate in the conversation with you today. And I personally really hope that in the future, our two institutions could work together in promoting student exchanges, as you mentioned, and in participating maybe in a Asheshi's education collaborative. I want to thank
Amen to that.
What did you say? Can you repeat?
I said amen to that. I really look forward to that as well.
Fantastic. I'll be reaching out.
Okay.
I also want to thank our audience and especially the students for spending some time with us this morning, if you are in the US, or evening, if you are in the African continent. I hope that your contribution and your vision will continue to move us forward for years to come and really strengthen the partnership and connection that we've been outlined today by our speakers. So as Dr. Gallimore mentioned, the next panel will focus on computing. And I hope very much that you will join us for that session as well. I will be serving as a moderator, and I'm looking forward to see everybody here at 9:30 Eastern Standard Time or 4:30 p.m. Central African Time. And as Dr. Gallimore said, please don't disconnect. You can just stretch your leg and be back in 10 minutes. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Good day again to all of our participants and welcome back again to Africa Week. Welcome to our panel on computing and its potential role in driving Africa's economic future. As I mentioned earlier today, I'm a professor of computer science at the University of Michigan. And over the past decades, I had many opportunities to pursue research collaboration with colleagues at University of Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, where I spent my last and only sabbatical in 2012. I also have the honor to serve as a Vice Provost for Engaged Learning, where I work to promote and support collaborations between the University of Michigan and our partners across the globe. I would like to start to briefly introduce our esteemed panelists before we dive into the discussion. I will be brief before I wish to give them time to tell us about some of their excellent and unique endeavors in promoting computing across Africa. We have with us 4 panelists today, all engaged faculty members in top academic institutions in the US and in Africa, who have launched important initiatives in technology education. So here we have Dr. Jelani Nelson, who is a professor of computer science at UC Berkeley, is founder of Addis Coder, a computer science summer program for Ethiopian high school students in Addis Ababa and other Ethiopian cities. The very first time I met Professor Nelson was during the summer of 2018 in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. We were introduced by Dr. Senat Fizeha, whom UN President Schlissel mentioned yesterday morning. Dr. Fizea is a cornerstone and enabler of U of M engagements in Ethiopia among many disciplines, and her work has a long-lasting impact and enabled many connections. Second, we have Dr. Filsum Andarji. He's an assistant professor of electrical and computer engineering in Addis Ababa University, and also an adjunct research scientist at the University of Michigan. Professor Andarji is a U of M African Presidential Scholar, UMAPS in short, alumnus, and is a co-founder of the African Undergraduate Research Adventure, that's called AURA, a program connecting Addis Ababa University students with the University of Michigan research efforts. Then we have Dr. Radiet Abebe, who's assistant professor of computer science at UC Berkeley and the junior fellow at the Harvard Society of Fellows. Professor Abebe is a co-founder of Black in AI, a network of over 1,500 researchers working in the artificial intelligence domain. And finally, Dr. Demba Ba, who's associate professor of electrical engineering and bioengineering at Harvard University and the Sloan Foundation Fellow. Professor Ba is the creator of CloudJ Hub, an accessible and extremely low-cost Amazon Cloud sandbox environment for data science, computation, and learning. Yesterday morning, Dr. Olukutun, speaking at the FinTech panel, remarked that there are lots of talented young people in Africa, with over 700,000 developers across different countries. And he said that what we need to do is to figure out how to harness all that talent to come up with African solutions to Africa's unique opportunity, a huge space for the next generation of computer scientists to be innovative and productive. So let's get started with our panel. To start, I would like to ask each panelist to tell us a little bit about their experience and endeavors in connecting with Africa and how they become engaged in promoting computing in Africa. So I'm gonna pass the mic to Professor Nelson first.
Hey, hello, everyone. So I have a couple intro slides to go with that question. Let me project. So as mentioned, I started a program called Addis Coder in Ethiopia. I started in 2011, the summer after I finished graduate school. It's a 4-week summer program, 5 days a week for high school students. It covers, well, really my intention was to cover algorithms, but the vast majority of students who participate don't know even basic programming yet. So I spend some time teaching that, and then I get into algorithms. And the very first time I taught it, 82 students completed the course. And the vast majority of the students, you know, they stay in Ethiopia and go to and study computer science or related field. We also have some number who decide that they want to study abroad, you know, in the US or South Korea or Germany. And the ones I've highlighted in red are from the very first batch of the program in 2011, who are now doing their PhDs. So we've had 6 of our alumni go into PhD programs. The first one was in 2011, then I paused for a bit, and then now it's basically annual, except 2020, sorry, it's early enough here in California that my nanny hasn't started yet, so there's a baby next to me. But summer 2020 was canceled because of COVID. A little bit of stats, we've always had more than 40% girls participating in our program. The first iteration was, in 2016 was 45%. Classes 8 to 9 hours a day, and we get students from all over Ethiopia. We cover, the topics covered here, a lot of algorithm stuff, but also some basic Python. And the last 2 times we ran the program, we had about 175 students each. And I think one of the concrete outcomes of the program is that a lot of kids who didn't know anything about CS are now exposed and want to major in CS in college. So this is the last slide I'm going to show you. We had a survey in 2019 of our students. And prior to Addis Coder, only 27 of the participants said they wanted to major in computer science or a related field. After the program ended, that number turned from 27 to 83, so more than tripled. So I'd like to think that we help them appreciate what computer science is about.
Thank you, Jelani, and say hello to the kid. So next up is Professor Adaji.
Thank you, Professor Bertacco, for your kind introduction. Okay, I'd like to talk about the African Undergraduate Research Adventure Program that was started in collaboration with the University of Michigan and AIT, and this was an initiative of Professor Bertacco and Professor Todd Austin. So this program is a research exchange program for our undergraduate students that are completing their 4th-year undergrad students and going into internships to allow them to travel to the University of Michigan and engage with University of Michigan College of Engineering faculty in doing research. And the program ran for 12 weeks during the summer. And the students had like the opportunity to do actual research and engage with a culture that is different from theirs. And finally, they're able to successfully present their work through like final presentations. Like when the program started, there were about 140 applicants in the first year, and there were only 10 places. In the second year of this program, we had about 130 people applying and 16 students taken. So in total, 26 students participated in this program. However, last year, the program could not be done in person because of the pandemic. And that meant like the mentors and students had to adapt to like this environment, and the mentors had to change their projects to fit like to do remotely. And I would like to say that this program has actually helped these students to become confident in themselves in doing research, and not only that, but also like the projects that they chose to work on for their final year basic thesis. Like it was an extension of usually like for most of them, it's an extension of what they did during the oral program, which is like helpful because I'm sure that most of these students want to pursue like their graduate studies, which is highly needed in our country. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Fitsum. Next up is Professor Abebe.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation to this panel and for all the work that you do to bring us all together. I appreciate it. So I'm Radhika Abebe. I just started at UC Berkeley as an assistant professor of computer science. And I want to first start by saying how rare that is. So every year, the Computing Research Association, or CRA in the US, puts out a survey to a lot of the PhD granting institutions in computer science, computer engineering, and information science. And each year, the numbers are roughly the same. So I'll tell you the numbers from last year, but it's been roughly the same over the past 5 years that I've been paying attention. So two statistics that I'll share with you is that if you look at people who graduated with PhDs in computer science in North America, which is what the CRA focuses on, you find that out of the over 1,500 people graduating with computer science, computer engineering, and information science PhDs, only about 20 of them tend to be Black out of over 1,500 people. And of those 20, it's usually about 5 or 4 Black women. And that number, that statistic kind of gets worse as you go up the academic pipeline. So by the time you get to people who are tenure track or tenured professors in computer science, computer engineering, or information science, the total population is now about over 5,000. There's over 5,000 faculty on the tenure track or tenured in these fields. But we learned that out of over the 5,000, we only have about 85 last year who are Black faculty. And this statistic was something that I learned when I was in the middle of graduate school, and it was really a statistic that I found very disheartening, because I could see that as you go down the pipeline, it keeps getting worse and worse and worse, and people who are from marginalized communities, including Black and African researchers, tend to be more and more isolated. And so to mitigate that, we started Black in AI, which is the initiative that Valeria mentioned. It's a network of, now we are about 3,000 people, Black individuals who are working in the field of AI, some researchers, some practitioners, policymakers, and so on. But we do have a large contingent of people focused on this academic pipeline, a lot of people focused on research scientists and researcher positions, including as professor of teaching or of research within the community. And so we have various programs within Black in AI, but the main one that is relevant to our discussion today is our academic program, which is focused on supporting people going through the academic pipeline, people in undergraduate programs who want to do research. So we have various programming for that. People who want to apply to graduate programs. We have programming to understand, to surface the challenges that they're facing as they apply to graduate programs, and also to try to mitigate them. We actually have some research on this even that's coming out in a couple of months. And we also are starting to support people who are currently in graduate school to kind of minimize the sense of isolation that a lot of Black individuals feel in graduate programs, especially for African individuals who might have to leave home to do undergrad or graduate school, as I had. It could be an especially isolating experience. And we're also starting to expand to think about how we can also help diversify the faculty pipeline. And so I'll stop there, but I'd be very happy to discuss with you all any questions that you might have, and I'll drop a link to the program so you can take a look at the details.
Thank you very much, Radiat. We'll have questions. So next up is Professor Ba.
Thank you, Professor Bertacco, for the kind introduction. So I have been at Harvard for 5 years now, and I've developed 2 courses that leverage Jupyter notebooks. So Jupyter notebooks are a platform for analyzing and processing data using a web browser. The idea behind these courses was to leverage the notebooks to bridge what I thought was a gap between data collection, I come from an electrical engineering background, IoT, and computer science, data processing, and management in education. So I termed this concept labs in the wild, and the backbone really of these courses that I've developed was this Jupyter notebook platform. And the main idea behind this is, how do we democratize, in a sense, access to data processing and data analysis tools and combine them with tools that enable students, for example, to use cheap devices to acquire data and have a ready platform to analyze these data. So the name of this platform is Cloud JHub, and what it does is that it automatically launches these Jupyter notebooks that students can directly access through a web browser without any need for local installation of packages, management of dependencies, and so on and so forth. So what this does, in my opinion, is that it enables students to focus on acquiring data using IoT-like devices and simply analyzing them. And having acquired the data, all what they need to do is to log in to a browser, and assuming they have internet access, they then have access to this platform, Cloud JHub, powered by Jupyter Notebooks, which, based on the numbers that we've done, costs about $2 a month for 30 hours of usage in any given month per student, which is relatively cheap. So that's less than the cost of a latte at Starbucks. So I can delve more into this in the Q&A session of the panel. So my vision for Cloud JHub really has to do with work that I've started doing recently with some entrepreneur in the startup scene in Senegal, where I grew up, where they have approached me, people that I've gone to high school with some visions as to how one could use data science and the platform that we've developed to connect people that are part of the informal economy in Senegal and in West African countries at large to the internet and to the tech scene. This is something I can delve more into the Q&A session for this. Thank you for the invitation, Professor Bertacco.
Thank you so much, Demba. So the premise of this panel is that among STEM disciplines, computing occupies a unique place among all other technology fields, and it doesn't require expensive requirement for lab spaces, lab machinery, clean rooms, and so on. The only real equipment required for computing are the people, the computers, and reliable power and internet. And hold on your thoughts on reliable power and internet. I know it's not an easy one. We'll get to that later. But let's think for a second about opportunities. One comment that emerged yesterday by Dr. Songwe is that in Africa, 20 to 40% of the population is under age 20, which means there is a huge fraction of the population that is being educated right now, and there is an opportunity to provide education venues that will create careers, innovation for the continent, jobs, and so on. So my first question to you all is, what do you think are the key opportunities that computing provides in the context of Africa and African citizens? Specifically within computing, which is a very large space, what do you think are the disciplinary sector that would be a best fit for the needs of the continent, or even for the background preparation of the students? And then in terms of how do people deploy this, what are the most accessible venues? For instance, joining large international companies. And I have to say, with COVID, it's much easier to join companies, even if they're not in the continent, or maybe higher education pursuit, or startups, and so on. So with that question, maybe we can start with Fitsum to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Valeria. So, of course, like computing is easier to get like a business out of it, because like you said, like what someone needs is like a laptop and a connectivity, and they can start their business. And now that like you said, the generation is young, this is actually happening. And I have also noticed that like in high schools, especially in private high schools, like students are like being taught programming, and so it's like their laptops are no more used for browsing. They can actually make applications on them. So I think like the stage is set for like for people to have the confidence and actually like, you know, think that they can make a difference like in the international like computing, should I say, for a lack of a better word, computing business.
Yeah. Jelani?
Yeah, so I mean, first let me preface by saying, you know, I know almost nothing about economics. I'm a theoretical computer scientist. So in terms of, you know, what real world, you know, disciplinary impact should we be looking for to have economic impact? I can't speak with confidence. I mean, what I can tell you though is going back to the statistic you mentioned about the number of young people. I mean, from what I've seen, you know, the number of there are a lot of hungry young people who are very eager in my experience to be exposed to computer science, to subfields like machine learning. And, you know, with our program now, you know, the number of people who applied, I can see it just from what I see in Coder, like the number of kids who are applying every year to participate is, you know, is giant, is huge. And you know, they're constantly contacting the teaching staff afterward, looking for more opportunities, et cetera. So I definitely agree there that there's a huge desire amongst the young population.
You know, one of the comments that came up yesterday and today was whether data science would be a discipline to really focus on, or a subfield to really focus on and push. And the other question is whether quantum computing is also a key opportunity for the continent. Now, I know at least two of you are committed their life to data science, so I'm not going to even ask that question, but maybe I can ask about the quantum computing aspect. So, Demba, do you have comments?
With regards to quantum computing in particular?
No, in general, like opportunities that you see. And yeah, tell me what you think about quantum computing as an opportunity for Africa.
So let me start with the data science aspect of this. I think as both Fitzum and Jelani have mentioned, right? So there's a lot of hungry young people. And what I've found in my experience, and I don't think this is simply restricted to Africa, right? Is that if we talk about data science, for example, right? I think the biggest issue is that there's a barrier to entry to even get to a point where you can start coding and actually playing with data, right? So not to promote Cloud JHub, but in my opinion, it would be awesome. And I'm not a policy person. I don't know how you implement this at scale, but it would be awesome if we could set up an infrastructure that is such that kids can just come sit down, not have to focus on setting up an environment, worrying about dependencies and so on and so forth, but they're given access to things such as devices to collect data. So IoT, you have an IoT background, Valeria, right? And all what they have to focus on is to learn the tools to process these data using some environment that has been put together for them. Now, how do you make this happen at scale? I don't know. I could very well see this part of something that governments invest in almost as a service that is offered in high schools, in universities. But I strongly believe that so facility with data literally is going to become the new form of literacy. And what I would love to see happen is for us to prepare African kids for something that actually has already started in a lot of places in the world. As far as quantum computing is concerned, let me pass that question to the next person.
That you're muted, and thank you.
That's unfair. I pass it back to you. You got to talk about quantum computing. I feel a bit duped here. So I really appreciate all the answers that people have given so far. I completely agree. In the interest of providing a complementary perspective, maybe I'll focus on the social aspects of what you asked about these barriers to entry. So of course I'm biased, right? You know, the continent is my home. That's where I grew up. That's where well, maybe now I've learned more things since I left than when I was there, but you know, a lot of the important things that I carry with me are things that I learned when I grew up in Ethiopia, right? So I'm clearly biased here, but one thing I want to say is a lot of times when we talk about data science in Africa, we very quickly get to all the limitations. That just becomes the whole point of the conversation. How can we teach people? How can we educate people? How can we do this? And how can we do that? I think it's important to also recognize just the extreme talent and innovation and creativity that's in the continent. I mean, I still talk to many students in Ethiopia who are just starting out, right? Just starting college, just left college and all that. And the things that they make, the things that they create, and with, you know, fewer things than I may have access to are just so incredible. I know someone who literally goes to Mercato, which, you know, if you've been to Ethiopia, well, you know what I'm talking about. He goes to Mercato, he just buys just totally random things, right? You know how Mercato is. And he builds these robots and he, you know, sends me pictures of these robots that he's built. And how amazing is that? I don't know how to build robots. I'm sure if I just like spent a lot of time on it, I could figure it out, but I don't, right? And so I think one thing I would really emphasize here is supporting African data science, supporting African computing, supporting African whatever it is, could look very, very different than what it looks like to support data science, say in the US, where I'm currently based, or I guess where many of us are currently based, right? And so I really do think we should figure out a system whereby those whom we are, the community that we're trying to support is actually the one that's driving the programs that we're putting together, the resources that we're trying to provide. And I say this because it's very easy to get this very, very wrong. So one example that I'll give is in AI and machine learning, there's now this massive excitement around machine learning for development, which is great. And there's a lot of sort of non-African researchers, people who've spent little to no time in the continent driving the research vision, actually, which is, a question mark. That's a little bit concerning. Let's dig deeper. And so one research that we've done is to try to understand the data accessibility and sharing ecosystem in the continent, right? Because if you want to do machine learning, you need data. If you're trying to do machine learning for development, you need data from, the nations that you're trying to study. And so we wanted to understand, how do people get access to that kind of data, and how do the people in these communities actually feel about it? And it was a research project that very quickly, we started thinking it was probably a neutral topic. It was absolutely not a neutral topic. People feel very negatively about their data kind of being extracted by people from the outside, by organizations, by powerful entities, by powerful individuals just coming in and saying, give us your data, we'll try to predict poverty or whatever it is. And we'll write a paper, you end up being middle author. More often than not, you're going to be in the acknowledgement, but you should feel good because, we just solved this problem for you. We come in, we solve this problem, we leave. We don't have an actual investment in what's going on, right? And so that's how people perceive what's going on. And I think that's actually a very fair assessment of what's going on. And so people practice all sorts of ways of resisting not sharing their data, and they do so sort of with their hands tied, right? It's not easy to tell someone, say, who's a Harvard researcher, as I am, to just say, no, actually, I don't want to give you this data, right? And so people practice all sorts of ways of resisting that. And so I mentioned a lot, but the thing that I would say here is the social aspects of what we're talking about shouldn't be ancillary. They're actually, they're the core of what's going on. If you're working with a different community, you got to engage with the terms of that community.
That's very true. And I have to say, in my experience working with undergraduate students in Ethiopia, they have an incredible amount of creativity and self-drive and self-motivation, exactly as you described. 1 year I was there right as people were presenting their undergraduate dissertations, and there were devices and robots flying everywhere. It was really quite an experience. So let me take like a large viewpoint from this, and I would like to ask you to envision how could computing look like in Africa 10, 15 years from now if we did everything right. And if you can discuss that a little bit, and then we can go down on how your program fits into that or could contribute to that. Would you like to start, Demba?
Sure. And I will keep this very brief. So for me, what I would love to see over the next 10, 15 years is and I'll tell a story that will exemplify this. So every year now with COVID, this doesn't happen anymore. I teach a neuroscience school with some colleagues in South Africa. And half of the students come from the African continent, many different places. And the other half comes from other places in the world. And one of the discussions that I've consistently have had with these students, right, is that they have difficulty simply accessing computing resources. So being able to access, so I'm in AI, so let's talk about deep learning, being able to access a machine with a GPU to run some experiments, right? So what I would love to see happen, and I think what would be awesome, is if one could very readily have access to these machines for cheap. And if that infrastructure could be set up. So in private conversations we've had, Valeria, one thing I mentioned is that over here in the US, I can very easily access a machine on Amazon, pay for it by the hour, and so on and so forth, do what I need to do, and then get out of the platform, right? I don't know about other places in Africa, but as far as I know, in places such as Senegal or Ghana, where some of the students that I talked to were from, this is not a capability that they have. So what I would love to see us do is to actually develop that infrastructure that would enable that.
So actually, one of the questions was about the aspect that there are some key worldwide companies who will be willing to provide cloud access for this type of applications, and they perceive the internet connectivity being the limiting factor. What you mentioned is even before that, right? It's just the ability to create an account and access the system. Do you see solutions? Do you know about policies that are coming into place to help in that direction?
So, I mean, in my opinion, what I've seen in the case of Senegal in particular is that the entities that have been able to push towards the setting up of such an infrastructure have been startup and entrepreneurs.
Got it.
And entrepreneurs in particular that have been developing solutions that the government all of a sudden gets excited about. I mean, whether we like it or not, in a lot of our countries, in Senegal in particular, it takes that kind of backup to make things like this happen. So I think I could very easily see how the entrepreneurial world, by pushing for solutions that have an impact that then authorities get interested in, it can push towards the development of better internet connectivity and so on and so forth, that could then make the access to these computing resources easier.
So there is a need of government level partnerships between companies and governments to be able to deploy this.
From entrepreneurs I've spoken to in Senegal, this is the impression that I've gotten, yes.
Okay. So Rediat, let's pop up to the bigger question. How could computing look like in Africa 10, 15 years from now?
That's a wonderful question. I had thought about this when you mentioned it previously too. It's very clear. It's not very easy to me to kind of map out exactly what it should look like, right? I think that we're sort of in a moment of change and it could go in any number of directions. But some elements of it that I would love to see are, one, that computing in Africa is solving African problems, and those look different from other parts of the world. And even within the continent, they look very different depending on which sub-communities you're talking about and looking at. And so I would really love to see computing in Africa looking African and therefore looking very different from, say, the questions that I see here in the US. I would love to see that. The second thing I would love is, in some ways, there has been a sort of lag in terms of the tools that we use here in the US versus, you know, how quickly they might be getting adopted in the continent, right? And vice versa, I should say. But in terms of the US or you know, Western to Africa direction, in terms of the tools that we're using here that have not been quite as prevalent across the continent, there have been a lot of mistakes that we've made, right? So issues of algorithmic fairness and bias come to mind immediately. There have been a lot of tools that we've built that have ended up destroying people's lives in the US, say application of these tools in criminal justice systems. And it's really, we're in a very tough position, right? We're trying to mitigate the inequities and injustices that these tools are exacerbating, at the same time, you know, trying to advance computing in the US. I would love to see Africa just avoid that altogether. I would love for especially sort of AI-driven systems within the continent to, from the beginning, be very aware of these issues of fairness and injustice and inequity, and to sidestep that as much as possible. So those are the two things, you know, nothing concrete, but I think those are the two big things that I would hope.
And there is an opportunity there, right? Because we can learn from the lesson learned in the US context. So, you know, being the second generation, we can start already on a better footing. Fitzo, 10, 15 years from now, everything went right.
Okay. So I would tell you from my experience, like what I have seen with the kind of students we used to get like 5 years ago and the kind of students we have now, and the kind of research they want to do. And it's almost difficult not to make them, I mean, it's almost difficult for us to find a student that is not interested to do their master's thesis or PhD in artificial intelligence, AI. I mean, we had to, you know, force them, like, you know, do some other thing because we also need other aspects of like computing as well. So where I think this is going to go is like in 10, 15 years, like I assume would be sufficient in like supporting computing infrastructure for ourselves, both in software, in hardware, and the needed human power, that like human capacity that we need, and it's because of the trend that I'm seeing in not only the students becoming capable, but also their confidence in the subjects as well. So for example, Demba was talking about resources. Like you guys were talking about quantum computing and how we don't have the resource, but students want to do projects in that. I have a student who's working on a project using quantum computing, and they are there, like undergrad students, like asking me which field should I join so that I could do I could become a master in quantum computing, and I mean, we're going to be self-sufficient. Like that's what I see in 15 years, like have the expertise in every field that we are in computing, so that we don't have to hire people anymore from our side.
So first of all, thank you for answering my quantum computing question that everybody was bouncing. But also, basically you're saying that the change is already happening. You already saw a big change in the last 5 years. And so as long as we keep the trajectory, there is a lot of promise. Things are really looking up.
Yes.
So what does Jelani think?
Sure. So what would I like to see as success in 20 years down the road? I guess a few things. One is I can only speak about Ethiopia because that's the only place I'm more familiar with in Africa. So I would like to see more awareness amongst the youth about computer science. For one, right now it's not even part of the standard curriculum. Computer science is not part of the standard curriculum for high school. I mean, and if I pick a random student from a random high school student in Ethiopia, well, a random person in the population is probably from a more rural region. And if I ask them, what do you want to major in? Let's say they're smart. What do you want to major in college? Sorry, that's I'm likely to get back the answer medicine, I think. Maybe they'll say engineering, but I think it's less likely that I'll hear computer science. And it's not because they're not interested. I think that they don't even know that they should be interested. They don't know what opportunities are available. So I'd like to see more awareness. That's number one. I would like to see more, I guess, improvement of bureaucratic processes that make it easier for people with ideas to be entrepreneurial. That's something that I don't know about as much myself. I'm very much an academic. I haven't done that much in entrepreneurship, but my understanding is that, and remember we talked about this in the past, not today, that it's not easy to start a business I know in Ethiopia, but in some other countries, there are all these kind of unnecessary barriers. Another thing I'd like to see is, again, maybe more stability of government and stability of just geopolitical stability. I mean, I think people talk a lot about investing in Africa. What can we do to get more VC money, etc. And I think the very first step is stability, right? If I'm going to invest my money, I want to make sure that that all processes are stable and nothing is going to disrupt my investment, right? So
I think everybody has a will for stability. Just sometimes it's hard to achieve, right? But the goal is there for everyone.
Oh, and actually, one more thing that I'll say, I see it's related to a question sort of indirectly that I see was asked by Todd Austin in the Q&A, which is, is there any fear of brain drain, or should I wait to I want
No,
to
you
connect.
can talk about it.
Okay. Is there any fear of brain drain? Like, these programs, let's say Addis Coder alumni, many of them are coming and doing PhDs in the United States. Is that a problem because that talent is now leaving Ethiopia? And I mean, what I can say is, I mean, look at maybe the biggest foreign sources of PhD students in the US. I would say maybe India and China in STEM fields, right?
Yep.
And I don't think, and those countries seem to be doing quite well. And I think the point is, even if the people come here for their studies and maybe they stay here for a few years afterward, if the environment is right back home, then they will want to go home. I mean, that's their home, right? A lot of people prefer to actually be at their home where their relatives are and where they have friends, etc. And if I talk to my mother, who's Ethiopian, back when she came to the United States, which was actually before Derg, it was during the Emperor Haile Selassie's regime. According to what she tells me, is the vast majority of Ethiopians who came to the U.S. actually had no intention of staying here. Okay, so you look at what is happening now. First of all, there are PhDs who come here. They come here for their PhDs who go back, right? For example, Solomon Asafa is a friend of mine. He came here for undergrad at MIT, did his PhD at MIT, spent some time at IBM in New York, and then he went on to found IBM Research Africa. And now he's based in South Africa, but he's also running the research lab there as well as Kenya, right? So
well, just an hour ago, we were talking to President Patrick Awa, who came to the US, worked at Microsoft, and then went back and founded one of the top universities in the continent, or most promising university in the continent. So yeah, I've seen that.
So just the final sentence to connect it is just, I would like to see more Africans getting PhDs in computer science. And maybe that means going abroad to get them in the beginning to bootstrap it. But I don't necessarily see it as a negative. And I think if you look at China and India, like in my field, Professor Andrew Yao, he was a professor at Stanford and Princeton. And then China recruited him to found an institute, the Institute for Theoretical Computer Science in Beijing at Tsinghua. And that's been very successful at producing, top students. So I'm not so pessimistic.
Awesome.
Can I jump in on that a little bit?
Definitely. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a really wonderful question, and honestly, the elephant in the room. So I appreciate the person who asked that. There are a couple of things that I would add. So this is obviously something that I've had to think about because I think it's a deeply ethical question and one that, I was like, maybe I'm contributing to some trend that's not a positive trend, right? I left when I was starting college in the U.S. and I haven't, I've stayed in the U.S., right? I'm going to be here for kind of the foreseeable future, and so I had thought very carefully about it. Two things I would mention here are, one is that I think that being places is not so binary anymore. Well, I guess right now it is binary just because we're all stuck in our apartments and waiting for this to end, right? But now it's not so much. There are a lot of people who split their time between different institutions, especially with everything being virtual. It really is possible to kind of have your foot into different places. This is very common. It's not just, those of us who've left home.
Radiat, I think it's less binary now than it's ever been. Like you are on the East Coast.
True. Yeah, in that sense, I guess no one is anywhere. Yeah, yeah. That's a great point, right? And even, once this nightmare is over, we're still going to have the ability to just split your time if that's what you want to do. And I do want to echo that, yes, we can probably point out a bunch of like one-off examples of people who studied somewhere and then went back or whatever. We can find examples for any combination of things that you want. But what's worth looking at here is what is the sort of the general sentiment and the pattern, right? Even though I'm in the US, my heart is still where I grew up, and my heart is in the continent. And so this is not something that I'm letting go, and I'm by no means an exception. And I think that a lot of people feel that that pull to contribute meaningfully to their home, whatever that looks like for them. So that's the other thing I'd mention. And the third thing is, there's something about the word brain drain that kind of feels a little bit uncomfortable to me. So I want to point it out. I think it has this sort of implicit assumption that there are some people that are extremely, extremely talented, and there's some system that is like sucking them out of, one place, let's say their country, and then to another place, let's say the US. But what about everyone else who hasn't left? Are we assuming that, you know, they are sort of less capable, that they have less to contribute? I think that's a very unhelpful way to think about it, right? And so again, that brings me back to the original point, which is, well, what are we investing in the country, in the countries that we're looking at, in the continent that we're looking at? And so I think we should really think about that, because I think every time this conversation about brain drain comes up, it very quickly goes to, well, you know, you're a super exceptional person and look, you're not home anymore. And I think that, you know, there are a lot of incredibly exceptional people. We just haven't actually given them a chance to sort of fully realize that.
I completely agree with you, you know, and even when you think with the professor hat, you think about like, how can you predict the path of an individual? Everybody has unique path in lives. They may be working in different places, different time. And just because they take one step, you cannot then project everything else they will do. Indeed, there are many ways to contribute to the country and to the country education or talent development. Thanks for bringing that up. So let's go back to our, you know, how would computing look like 10, 15 years from now? And how does your initiative fit into that? And you know, actually, by the way, there are some questions that are coming up. There are people who would like to know how to apply for your initiative, how to join, how to get access to it. And so I don't know if you can chat the link or if you want to address it in your answers. And then there are also questions saying, you know, we're talking about pursuing activities that bring in young African talent, but then are we actually creating a divide between rural and city people? And how do you or close that divide or contribute to close the divide or foreseeing closing that divide? Who would like to start? Radiat, maybe? Or Jelani?
I think I answered it, so let me skip this one.
Okay.
I roughly answered it, yeah.
Yeah, Jelani.
Sorry, can you briefly say that again?
Yes, how does your program, Anti-Scoder, contribute to try to reach that future 10, 15 years from now that we just discussed? And specifically in your program, actually, I think you have a great comment that you could provide there. How do you close the gap between city and rural environments where access to resources is much more limited?
Right. So first of all, the vast majority of our students these days are from rural areas. You know, the program happens in Addis Ababa, which is the capital city, but less than 10% of the participating high school students are actually from Addis Ababa. So we accomplished that in a number of ways. The main way is, and I can't take credit for this, you know, we co-organize our program with the Mala Zenawi Foundation. And, you know, when I first started the program, I was just doing it by myself. I put ads on the website. I had people go into schools and post flyers. I had radio stations advertise. All the students I got were from Addis Ababa, and the majority were from private schools, even though it was a free program. And, you know, I found that problematic, that somehow only kind of the richer than average kids were taking advantage of this free resource. So I decided to partner with the government, and I didn't really know how to navigate the government bureaucracy myself. So I partnered with an Ethiopian organization, which is the Mala Zenawi Foundation, that had a lot of contacts with the government. And, you know, with them, now we work with the Ministry of Education. 75% of our students every summer are selected by the Ministry of Education. So they go to all the, you know, the regional offices and say, from your region, I would like you to pick, you know, the top students in your region and recommend them for this Anti-Scoder program. So we got a ton of rural students. We've had students, you know, who have never even typed on a keyboard before. And, you know, in the very first week, we do some extra lessons after class just to get them the basic, you know, keyboarding skills. Okay, so that's that about the rural urban. And one other thing I'll say about the rural urban divide as well. We also these days, first of all, we have a teaching staff that's quite large every summer, and half our teaching staff are TAs based in Ethiopia. And we intentionally recruit them from all over the country. So we don't want all our TAs to be from Addis Ababa University. Like we've had TAs from Gondar, from Jimma, from Adama, from Addis Ababa, from like LA, Adigrat, etc. Intentionally from all over. And the reason is we tell them when we recruit them, it's not a requirement, but we just kind of hint that it would be nice. Wouldn't it be great if after the summer was over, you went back to your home region and started your own kind of offshoot program that could run, throughout the year as opposed to just the summer. And I think that it works. This planting of that idea in their head works. And we've had several offshoot programs run by former teaching staff of Addis Coder, as well as former students, alumni. And again, primarily outside of Addis Ababa, outside the capital city. Good. So, and the other question was like, how does this contribute to more awareness or the vision that I hope to see in the future? It definitely increases awareness. So if you saw the, I'll say a couple things. One is when I gave my intro slides, I mentioned that the number of students who said they're interested in CS tripled, more than tripled, based on our surveys amongst our participants. And it's not just the exposure from teaching them CS. We also have things like a career day. We brought in over a dozen people, primarily, Ethiopians living in Ethiopia, so that they can see that this is not just, CS is not just important to create Facebooks, and Googles abroad, but there are people locally using computer science to launch companies and work for the government and et cetera. Okay, so, and we've had startup founders in Ethiopia, startup founders in Kenya come by. We've had researchers come by who are based, African researchers. So that increases awareness. That's one thing. There's one other thing I was going to say. Okay, I'm blanking right now, but I think we've succeeded at least. Yes, another piece of evidence about increasing awareness, which is I was watching Ethiopian television, and they interviewed the number one. So Ethiopia is one country that has a national exam to get into university. Many countries have this, and on TV, they were interviewing the number one high school kid in Ethiopia. He was from Bahir Dar. Okay, he got number one in the country on the national exam. He had never done Addis Coder. Okay, but in his interview, he started talking about Addis Coder, and he started talking about me. And I was like, how does this kid even know what? So I think even though we're only training 175 students per summer, somehow the word has gone out. I think because some of our alumni have been interviewed on TV. The word has gone out, and like kind of a lot of kids now, even if they didn't participate in the program, are realizing, hey, there's this program, and hey, there's this thing called computer science, and they start Googling, and it kind of triggers them to self-study a little bit of computer science too. So it's kind of contagious in that way.
Thank you. Demba and Fitsum, do you want to go first? Oh, Fitsum maybe, he's not muted.
Yeah. So like for us, the rural city divide is handled by the government, because the government like chooses which student is to study where. So like they're like placed. So like we usually have like a proportionate number of students from like all over the country. And so that is the pool that applies to the Aura program. And like I would say that there is like a higher chance of like representation from all over. In fact, if you remember last year, when we had to do the online version, we had an issue because most of the students were outside of Addis, and the internet was blocked outside of Addis, and they didn't have access. So like that shows you like the distribution of students that we have. Like another thing that I actually want to like ascertain why computer science and like anything tech has been the focus of like new student desire to study is because the I would say the old, for example, for engineering, the old and like established engineering, like they don't have a market like for jobs. So the people know if they study like computer science, like software engineering and topics like that, fields like that, they would have like job opportunities. And that is also what is driving not only like the awareness, but like what is actually happening in the market. Like because people studying, like for example, software engineering, their employment rate is 100%. people studying electrical and computer engineering, their employment rate is almost like 100%. It's 90-something%. But like if someone wants to study like civil engineering as they used to, like say like 5 years ago, they're not getting employed as much as they used to. And guess what? They're also studying like software engineering, and so that they're also like getting into that business as well. And another thing that I want to talk about, the studies associated with like brain drain, is actually that so when the honors like program started, there was reluctance from like authorities from like AIT, because they were thinking that these students would go and disappear. But what happened was that all the 10 people went and did their they did research, and they improved, and they came back. And now people are excited about whenever I say that this Aura program, like how many students, can we have more students? And like, so what is happening is that now we have more students. For last year, like we had about 16 students like do this, even if they didn't get the chance to travel, but they were able to do research here, like with like the resources they have got. And that kind of opportunity, I mean, how would you get it? Like, we're building our capacity here, but there is an already established capacity that we can utilize, right? So I mean, like, I have, like, it's a good thing. It may not like pay up right now, but like in 10, 20 years, it's going to pay up big, because like people are like say coming back, but when they come back with capital.
That's a
and that
fantastic
is going.
thought.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
And Demba, do you have comments about how CloudJ Hub can help reach our goals?
Yeah, before I get to that, actually, I want to follow up a bit on what Jelani said. I think one of the things that we underestimate, at least that I do or that I used to, is the power of example. So the power of you donating your time, Jelani, consistently on a yearly basis, and kids seeing your example and being like, wow, you know what, this is a possibility. I think we underestimate that. And this ties into your question, Valeria, because, okay, so how do I take somebody like CloudJ Hub and make it help the continent, which is something that I have not done yet, right? One of the things that I would love to do, right? I don't think, and perhaps the other panelists have a different opinion on this, I don't think there's going around me actually donating my time and going to Senegal or in any other country that would welcome me and spending some time to actually set up this infrastructure for them, right? And then empowering them to sustain it in the future. So that's one of the things that I would love to do, hopefully in a year or two when Professor Life gives me that opportunity. Now, in terms of the rural divide, again, so the only experience that I have about this is by going back to Senegal and talking to my friends who are in the entrepreneurial teams. So I can't talk about this from an educational perspective, but from a problem-solving perspective, what I've seen them do a lot, and this came in a few of the comments that have been made earlier, is I don't think that we want to be thinking about using computer science to build the next Facebook or the next Google. I think Regid and Jelani mentioned this earlier, right? So one way these friends of mine have been bridging this rural city divide is to actually go talk to people in the rural areas and figure out what kind of problems they have that we could use tech or data science or computer science to actually solve. So in other words, involving these rural communities in the process of coming up with ideas to solve local problems.
So I would like to address another couple of questions in the few minutes that we have left. The first one is, we outlined these goals, but we all know there are barriers, right? Barriers of access to education, access to electricity, access to internet. And I have to tell you, yesterday we had a discussion with Dr. Songwe, who expressed that the priorities of promoting STEM education have increased, especially in light of the pandemic, that she has set a priority to try to bring all the schools in Africa to have access to internet, because it's become much more necessary in light of the pandemic. I would like to hear from you, maybe briefly, what do you think can be done to remove these barriers that we all know about? I mean, beside maybe policies and talking to government, which of course can be done, and of course it has a role, but it's also a very challenging and hard to control type of contribution. If I don't know if any of you has ideas and suggestions, and then I wanted to ask you one more question before we close.
Can I answer that? Like, at least from my experience here. So what I have noticed that before the pandemic and after the pandemic is that an attitude change. When I say attitude change, is because before that the pandemic, like I think the people that are making the policy and the telecom company and the people using the infrastructure, like the clients, didn't think they needed the internet. So what happened was, like, when the pandemic hit and everybody had to work from home, and so like the telecom companies scrambled, people scrambled to get access to the internet, and actually, like, at least like a wired internet coming to their homes. And people also changed their attitudes in paying for that service. Because I remember, like, I've been trying to get my parents to get connected for like years, but they refused because they thought that the monthly payment they had to pay was too much. But now that's the only way they could get to us. So they got that service. So this is true for almost a lot of households, like in Ethiopia now have a wired connectivity. So I would assume that this happened because of like the need, and that need actually changed the attitude of the people. And
they prioritize differently.
Yes. So like that would also means that this would also reflect into, like, you know, the policy making, like officials, right? They would say, okay, yes, it is important. We need to have the internet and we need to have access to everyone, right? So I think I'm hoping that this is the trend everywhere in Africa and probably in the world as well.
Thank you. Do we have other comments? I really wanted to ask you something. So, oh, I think Rediat want to say something. No?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. I'll mention maybe two things really quickly. It doesn't really completely answer your question because I think this question is sort of intractable, to be honest. So I definitely think we should recognize the sort of the legacy of colonialism and the impact that it's had on the continent. It really wasn't that long ago. We're still feeling the impact now. We really haven't had, we haven't totally confronted that. We haven't totally sort of tried to mitigate the harms that have been done as a result of, this legacy of colonialism, right? And so that's left many nations with fewer resources and impoverished, and it's just been very difficult to dig out of that. Okay, that's a reality. And so I don't think we're going to solve anything until that kind of more historical or I guess policy problem has been solved, right? So this is not a computing question. So that's something I want to say. I don't know what that would look like, but I do think it's important to point that out. The second thing, which is sort of maybe almost like the opposite of what I just said, is also that it's really great that when I'm on panels that involve the continent, we're thinking about the barriers that people on the continent have to face, lack of connectivity, all these things. That's real. We should definitely talk about it, right? The numbers are they speak for themselves in a sense, right? We have only at most a third of the population being connected in any kind of country in the continent. That is just a number, that is just a fact. But I also want to say that it's not a purely African problem. And I say this because, right now we're in the US where a lot of schools have gone virtual. And what we're learning is that a lot of Black and Hispanic and low income and other marginalized students are not actually able to learn at the same rate as everyone else. They don't have internet at home, or they have very slow internet at home, or there are all these issues that are happening. And so I just want to point that out because I think that if we really want to make progress in terms of computing for Africa, computing for good, whatever we want to call it, I think that we need to have a sort of balanced view, which means I think also not recognizing that some problems that we talk about as being African problems are actually just a problem everywhere. It's just that some countries, I think, are just refusing to kind of confront that in the same way as we are. So I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. Okay, so one of the topics I definitely wanted to touch upon is academic partnerships, right? What do you think academic institution like mine or yours could do in terms of developing partnership that would accelerate the pace at which we reach that vision that you had and described for 10, 15 years from now? So, get more people involved in computing, get more professions in that space, get Africans be more involved on the global scene in terms of ideas and research in computing. And I would start with Jelani, if he's okay.
Yeah, sure. One, so I'll say things as they come to my mind. One is eliminate the GRE requirements. Okay.
COVID help with that one.
Yes. So, I think Rediad can probably say more about a study she's done, but just the number of people who, and it's not only African students, but people from, let's say, countries that aren't on average have, people are less rich than they are in the United States. The GRE is a very expensive exam. Okay. There are countries for which the GRE exam is a month or several months of salary for a family. Okay.
I need to add something here.
Oh, yeah.
I read several publications about the GRE, including by the company who runs GRE.
Okay.
And what is being established is that GRE is best at predicting the profession of your parents. Maybe it has a relation with the grades of the first semester. It has nothing to do with your graduate school success. So let's put that one to sleep. Next.
Another one I'd like to see is maybe have more. Universities love to have study abroad programs. This is more at the undergraduate level.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the stats are across all American universities, but like, let's say, for example, I know at MIT, where I attended as a college student, there aren't that many or kind of study abroad programs in Africa. And what I like to see is more study abroad programs in Africa that also are not like service-based. It's not like we're going there for charity. It's like we're going there to interact in a meaningful way with institutions there, with universities there, etc., with companies there. So I'd like to see more of that. Get people used to the idea of, get the students in your university used to the idea of interacting with African institutions.
Okay. And Demba, do you have thoughts about possibilities for academic partnership that could help?
So following up on Jelani's comment, I think, at least in my opinion, I think at least in the beginning, more so than efforts that are driven at the level of administration and universities. So it takes individuals. It takes, for example, what you started, Valeria, or it takes somebody like Jelani or myself or Rediad going there and starting something, achieving some success, and all of a sudden, and because whether we like it or not, institutions like to see some form of success before they commit to efforts like this, right? So I really think that it starts from grassroots type of efforts. But once it is established at the university level, I love what Jelani just said about just going there and listening and actually letting the local institutions basically drive the work of how things should happen over there, as opposed to coming from a perspective of assuming that all the solutions are at the disposal of the person who's coming to help, basically. So giving a hand up, basically, and not a handout. Yeah,
very good point. Do you have comments from Fitsum or Rediad?
Yeah, I am a product of that collaboration. So I would definitely say that academic collaborations actually build local capacity, and at the same time they create opportunities for further engagement. For example, I remember when you guys first visited, like Demba said, like you guys came and visited us, right? That's where it all started, right? For the collaboration between AIT and College of Engineering at UM. And this is true with other universities as well that we have collaboration with. it's like you make the first connections, and then then that connection becomes institutionalized and expands into other fields as well.
Thank you. Okay. So before we close the panel, I would like to know if you have a key message you wish to leave our audience with. Who would like to start? Jelani? Demba, go ahead.
I can take this, and it's related to a question that's been asked in the Q&A. I was just taking a look, right? So because, and there's not enough time for me to expand on this, but I think there's an assumption that we don't have a history of computing in Africa, right? Which is faulty. And I could go into the details of this, right? And I think the key message that I want to leave, especially for Africans and African young people, right, is that if you look at our history, we have a tremendous history of computing. I mean, for example, so binary communications and digital is part of some African traditions in Mali and in other places. So I think what I would love to leave young people with is this idea that, hey, we have this in our history, and let's start figuring out ways we can start becoming part of this more recent revolution in computing, but within our own context, and that people like me, and I think everybody else on the panel here, we're willing to help. Yeah,
that's a fantastic idea, actually, a history of computing based in Africa. I'll think about that one. Really like it. Fitsum.
I would say this, I keep saying about confidence, right? And the reason I keep saying that is that like when like computers came, they took, like, for example, when computers came to Ethiopia, they like, I remember I was like in high school, and we were not even allowed to get into their in the room the computers were, right? So we grew up getting scared of computers, and like, because they were expensive and only like a few experts were allowed to work on them. And the same mentality, like I've seen in many of like my students, like in the 10 years ago, but that is changing. And so like we need to work on I think like in the future, we need to work on further to like expand on the confidence of the people that they could use this tool and improve themselves, and also like help with the economic growth of their countries.
Thank you. Jelani.
Yeah, so a message that I want to leave people with. I think I'll keep it short. Maybe if you're inspired to create your own kind of program, whether it be something like Aurora Coder or something else that you want to do, there are a lot of there are ways to set up your program where the cost would be minimal, and I think there's nothing stopping you from doing it right now. So the first time I ever ran Coder, the only financial expense was my plane ticket to go there. The kids got to the program with their own, via their own transportation, etc. So there's no real barrier to starting these kinds of things on your own, and I would encourage you to try if you're so inclined.
Thank you. And Radiat.
I appreciate everything that's been said by my fellow panelists, and I especially appreciate the history of computing done by. I think about that not just in computing, but other contexts a lot. I think it's very easy to assume that Africa doesn't have this rich history and context that we can work off of. So I will say for those who are not African but want to support computing in Africa, or really anything in Africa, I would say probably whatever knee-jerk reaction, if you don't have context in the continent, if you haven't lived there, if you're not really embedded in the context, whatever ideas you have are probably going to be not 100% correct, right? They're probably going to be maybe 50% or something. And so I would really, really encourage you to work in collaboration with organizations and with individuals who are already doing that work, because chances are they probably need you to really support them, to support the work that they're doing. I can certainly say that for Black in AI, there's many different ways in which you can support. And so try to do that. You don't have to be the hero of that story. Just let people do their thing and kind of support. Okay, so that's what I would say. And in terms of those who are African, who are on the continent, especially people who are just starting out with their computing career or starting to think about it, the thing that I struggled with most, despite having, you know, all the privileges that I have, the thing I struggled with most was that I, in my sort of isolation and being the only, you know, Black person around oftentimes, and certainly being the only African person around, I often doubted my perspective on things. I would always think, okay, I'm thinking about this differently. Seems like everyone else is not thinking about it this way. Probably the way I think about it is not quite mature, or it's not quite computing. Maybe I'm not supposed to be a computer scientist. There was a great deal of sort of self-doubt and kind of challenge that came with that. And I consider myself to be a reasonably, you know, self-assured person. And it's very, very hard to not feel that way when you feel so different. And I would say how you think about things differently as a result of, you know, the life that you've lived, the context that you have is actually a superpower. It's going to make you a very unique researcher, a very unique practitioner of computing. And so, of course, you know, do what you can to learn what you can about the environments that you're entering, but try to preserve what makes you special and what makes you different, and the unique perspectives that you're bringing to the table. Because by the time you get to sort of a more secure position, it really is going to be this like massive asset, and it's going to be the thing that will keep you going. So that's what I would add.
Thank you so much, Radiat. So we reached the end of our panel session today. So thank you very much to all of you for joining us. And I really would like to send a special thank you to Jelani, who dialed in at 6:30 in the morning, did not have babysitter coverage, and just plow through this. So thank you very much. I would like to thank our audience and especially the students that are with us today. And I would like to just put a plug. The next panel will feature a discussion on transportation and future opportunities in the African context, which is both opportunity to develop new technology, but also enable new connection, including in computing, to pursue joint venture across the continent. The moderator is Professor Jerry Lynch, who's department chair of the Department of Civil Environmental Engineering at the University of Michigan. And he will sit down with colleagues and entrepreneurs from the United States, Uganda, and South Africa. While we wait to start the panel, I will ask everyone to stay connected with us as we prepare the next session. Feel free to stretch your legs and be back here at 11 a.m. East Coast time or 6 p.m. Central African time. Thank you so much to everyone. It was great
Thank you,
to be with
Valeria.
you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to our panel. This morning's panel is titled The Future of Transportation in Africa, Evolutionary or Revolutionary? I'm Jerome Lynch. I'm the Donald Malloy Department Chair of Civil and Environmental Engineering. Given the relevance and the importance of mobility on my profession, I've been asked to moderate this session today. And it's a great honor for me to serve as moderator and to be able to share the stage, if you will, with the leaders of the mobility space as we unpack questions around the future of mobility on the African continent. Undoubtedly, it's a very exciting time for mobility in Africa. Today, Africa is roughly 1.3 million people in 54 different countries, but by mid-century it's projected that that population may double. It's also an emerging market for mobility and mobility services, with many today in the industry drawing parallels to other emerging markets that emerged over the past few decades, including China, where today we see China as one of the largest automotive and mobility markets in the world. So there's similar promise for Africa. We've already seen significant early investments in part of Africa in terms of the automotive sector, ranging from BMW, for example, in South Africa, all the way to Renault Nissan in Morocco, and other car companies aiming to enter the African market, both for manufacturing and sales in the coming years. Also, African nations are quite young with a very strong entrepreneurial spirit. This dynamic environment provides a significant level of innovation and entrepreneurialism that's necessary to bring forth new mobility solutions to the market and to explore new business models that may go with those mobility solutions. Also, given the rapid advancement of technology, there's tremendous opportunity for technology to also offer African countries leapfrog capabilities on how they invest in transportation and mobility services within their own communities. So to unpack these very complex questions, we're honored to have an illustrious panel with us this morning. So I'm going to begin by introducing each panelist before allowing each of them to provide their own opening remarks. So I'm going to do this also in alphabetical order. So we're honored to have as our first panelist, Edward Hightower, who's currently the Managing Director of Motoring Ventures and is the author of a book called Motoring Africa, Sustainable Automotive Industrialization. It's a book I actually consulted to prepare for today's panel, so a fantastic read for those that are interested. Edward has had a long career in the automotive sector, spending significant time at General Motors, BMW, and Ford. And he's also currently serving as an alumni in residence here at the University of Michigan in our Ross School of Business. And we've invited Edward to serve on today's panel because he's able to speak to many of the trends that we see in the industry and also share with us some of his thoughts on how fast technology will be adopted in the African market with respect to transportation and mobility services. Our second panelist is Titus Kimbawa, who's the business team operation lead for a startup company in Uganda called Zembo. He's a seasoned entrepreneur who has a degree in economics from the University of Washington. And we've invited Titus to join our panel today, and we're honored to have him to gain some insight to the entrepreneurial community that exists in many of the African countries, particularly his experiences with Zembo, which is an upstart scooter company in Uganda that's looking at having investment in both infrastructure as well as new mobility services based on scooters. Our third panelist that we're honored to have is Professor Henry Liu, who's the Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering here at the University of Michigan. Professor Liu is also the director of our Center for Connected and Autonomous Transportation here at the university. We've invited Professor Liu to join our panel to be able to speak to some of the smart technologies that we're seeing, namely connectivity and automation that's certainly being explored and adopted globally. Quite interested in learning how those technologies can be transformative with respect to future investments in mobility services in the African continent. Finally, we're also honored to have Darren Van Mali, who's the Current Affairs Director for Africa and also the Executive Director of South Africa for Ford Motor Company. Darren has been with Ford for nearly 20 years, moving through their executive ranks, primarily focused on Africa and the markets that exist in various African countries. I'll also note that he's a non-executive director at the Tshwane Automotive Special Economic Zone as well. And we've invited Darren to join our panel to provide us with real insight to how industry players are viewing opportunity within the African market. So as you can see, this is an illustrious panel, and we're quite honored to have them with us this morning. So I'm going to now turn it over to each panelist to essentially say a number of opening remarks. And I'll begin with Edward. Edward?
Okay, well, thank you, Jerome. Good evening, everyone. I'm Edward Hightower, Managing Director of Motoring Ventures, and as Jerome said, the author of Motoring Africa. I'm based in Detroit, but I'm actually joining you this evening from Kampala, Uganda, where I'm visiting a client of mine, Kira Motors Corporation, which is a late-stage manufacturer of electric city buses. And first of all, I just want to thank the University of Michigan for inviting me to participate in this panel today. This is a topic that I have a great deal of passion about and have for quite some time. But the way I look at it is, whether the future of personal transportation is, ride sharing, city buses, vehicle sharing, last mile solutions, the real opportunity, as I see it, is in the manufacturing of the vehicles themselves, the manufacturing and the production of the vehicles themselves. Because as we just heard, the African continent has a population of about 1.3 billion people. However, that's about 17.5% of the world's population. But on the continent, only about 1% of the world's vehicles are produced. You compare that to the country alone of China, which has a similar population of about 1.3 billion to the African continent, where they produce about 30% of the world's vehicles. So there's a significant opportunity as these markets grow, as the population works towards doubling by 2050, and as the workforce grows to be the largest workforce in the world by 2035, there's an opportunity to localize the value chain, localize the supply chain, and to produce more of these vehicles in market where the consumers are. I mean, the African continent represents one of the fastest growing markets in the world, and the automotive supply chain represents a significant opportunity for economic development and industrialization to drive industrialization in these markets. From my experience, leading vehicle programs in the industry, there are about 30,000 parts in a vehicle, and about 70% of them are built outside, by outside suppliers, if you will, not by VW, not by Ford, not by Toyota, but by an outside supplier. And those suppliers tend to create 4 to 5 times the number of jobs as the automakers themselves. So the opportunities for driving industrialization, creating skilled workforce, driving sustainable economic development are really a big opportunity with localization of vehicle manufacturing and the supply chain. All of those 30,000 parts have to be stamped, cast, forged, plastic injection molded, coated, painted, and all of those skills that go into making all of those components end up being transferable to many other industries, whether it be medical devices, consumer durables, or other industrials. So localization creates an opportunity for other industries as well. And many African governments, like Uganda's, recognize the opportunity and the benefits of industrialization, and they're supporting the creation and the development of the automotive sector. And I look forward to discussing this on this panel today. So thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Edward. Really appreciate those opening remarks. Okay, so I'm now going to turn it over to Titus, who's going to talk to us a little bit about his startup company and entrepreneurial climate in Uganda. Titus.
Hello, thank you so much for having me on the panel to discuss everything that's happening here in Uganda regarding transportation and all the entrepreneurs happening, all the entrepreneur action that's happening here. First, I want to thank Jerome and the University of Michigan for having me. It's an honor. So an honor to be surrounded by also folks like Edward and Mr. Van Mally to be on this panel. They have so much knowledge, and I look forward to learning from them. Also, just sharing some of my experience here. As you introduced me, I have been in many different companies, early stage companies, building in the U.S., mainly Seattle and San Francisco. But I decided to move back to Uganda to my roots, which is where I was born, and I got excited at all the happenings here and everything that that needed to be built. So I took hold here, and I came across a company called Zembo, ran by Daniel and ATN, who are French and German nationals. And I took interest in it, and I joined to help them expand their operations and really build the company. So as you mentioned, the biggest thing I can share on here is the on foot of a small company working alongside, working in an environment like where you have a company like Kira, which is a big company, late stage, building buses and other electric vehicles, while we have an electric motorcycle that is used for taxis. I'm excited to give you the insights on what's happening regarding that, from the challenges and all the opportunities ahead for it.
Great. Thank you, Thijs. We're looking forward to hearing more about Zembo as well. Okay, our third panelist is Professor Henry Liu. So Henry, if you could share with us your opening remarks specific to technology and technology opportunities potentially in Africa.
Sure. Can you see my slide?
Yes.
All right. Hello, everyone. As Jerry mentioned, my name is Henry Liu. I'm a professor in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department. I also direct the Center for Connected Automated Transportation. It's a pleasure to be here to discuss technology opportunities for mobility in Africa. Before I talk about the technology opportunity for Africa, I want to start with what I think the future transportation will look like mostly from Western countries, particularly in the US. What we will see in any of the transportation systems, there's three major components. One is the people who are using the transportation systems, and then the vehicles, as well as the infrastructures. What I see in the last 10 years or so, the travelers become smarter. What you see is we use a lot of smartphones. Everybody has a smartphone, and smartphone has many applications on it, and some of these are related with transportation, particularly on ride sharing and mapping and navigation and things like that. And we also see from the vehicle perspective, the vehicle become more connected as well as automated, and the vehicle will be able to talk to each other and then talk to the infrastructure as well. And AI has a great application in automated driving, and that's happening in many parts of the world in terms of technology development. We're also seeing rapid development in terms of infrastructure technologies, and given what's happening in the vehicle world as well as in the personal usage or personal demand for transportation, we see what's happening in infrastructure and become from the independent infrastructure systems without any connection to either trailer or vehicles become more cooperative vehicle highway systems, and they are communicating with vehicles, they're communicating with trailers, and so providing the backbone to the transportation systems. And all of that is powered also by the AI and big data, cloud computing, and all of these are the backbone of the technologies for what's happening in the transportation systems. So that's what's happening right now, particularly in the last 10 years or so. And I see these are also technology drivers for mobility applications in Africa as well. And as Jerry mentioned, that Africa has a large population and is also rapidly growing. And also with urbanization within the Africa continent, and by 2030, 50% of the Africans will be in urban cities. And we also see mega city is emerging in the past 10 years, and a number of cities become more than 10 million population. And we also see still a large percent of the daily trips are made by non-motorized mode, basically by either walking or by bicycles. And so that also drive in terms of how future transportation technology will apply in Africa. And we also see inadequate public transportation system. Many people still don't have access to public transportation. And in the cities, we also see the traffic jams and the delays in the traffic system. And one particularly important thing related with traffic systems in Africa is high accident rate per capita, and that's probably the highest globally in all the continents. So I think these are the technology drivers, and coupled together with what I see in the future transportation technologies. And so I'll talk a little bit in terms of what I can tell in terms of opportunities, particularly from technology perspective. And we also see technology, rapid adoption of smartphones, and the smartphone adoption will create tremendous opportunity for transportation and as well as mobility. And for example, ride sharing, and we see a number of ride sharing companies or ride hailing companies has emerging in Africa. And because the capability of utilizing smartphone to connect the transportation demand and supply. And I think the bike sharing is still largely unexplored, although Tyler's talk about Zumbo, and I am very happy to see the scooters and e-bicycles are emerging in that market. And with smartphones, people will have better access in terms of travel information, and so that they become more informed in terms of either the available transportation mode or the current status of the transportation, the traffic flow. On the smart vehicle side, I see the electrification and automation are also the trend, not only for the Western world, but also for the Africa. And this is particularly, I think this is particularly important for ride sharing networks. And in my current capacity as a professor and in the last couple of years, I also took a leave absence working in a company called Didi in China. And that experience tells me electrification actually has, particularly electrical vehicles, has a lot of applications in ride sharing networks. And in at least in China, a large percent of the electrical vehicles are actually on Didi networks. And that's a ride sharing company. And so electrical vehicles will have a lot of applications, a lot of usage on ride sharing platform companies, and mostly because these companies will have better usage comparatively with personal usage of electrical vehicle. These company will have better information and better handle in terms of the energy consumption and charging and so on. So and low-cost personal vehicles, particularly motorcycle, will still continue to grow. And that's what I will see in Africa, because the low car ownership currently in Africa. And just like a landline telephone network, I also see a huge opportunity there for shared mobility as well as mobility as a service. And because of the car ownership is still low at the moment, and so in the future, the stage of personal owning a car may be skipped into directly into a mobility as a service type of situation. And the last thing I want to mention is on the infrastructure. And in the large, by and large, in Africa, the road network is not still under development. And so the government investment on road infrastructure still plays an important role in mobility improvement. One thing I do want to mention is that with the new technology on smartphones, as well as connected automated vehicles. And I also see this produce new technology solutions to infrastructure management without heavy investment from the infrastructure perspective. So I just draw example from my past experience with Didi, and when I was in Didi, I developed this business unit called Smart Transportation Business Unit. Basically, it is trying to utilize the Didi vehicles, the vehicles on Didi network as a mobile sensor to capture the traffic flow information, and then to utilize that information to manage the traffic control devices. And this has been applied not only in China, but also in other countries, for example, Brazil and Mexico. And I show you the picture I show you. This is Didi's deployment in Mexico, in Puebla City. And so what you see here is for those utilizing those vehicles on Didi network as a mobile sensors, and they're trying to show you for all the intersections, what are the current status of these intersections without instrumentation of infrastructure sensors. And so that save a lot of the government investment money, and you can utilize that money to invest on other like public transportation. So so I do see technology present solutions and on the infrastructure investment as well. So with that, I'm going to stop here.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to now turn it to Darren Van Mully, who's going to share with us his opening remarks from the perspective of an industry executive based in South Africa. Darren?
Hi, thanks, Professor Lynch. Appreciate the opportunity to participate on this panel, and also to the university to extend this invitation. I've got a bit of a different approach regarding where we're heading into Africa. And I think in consulting with various organizations in preparing for this panel, I think instinctively, it's been revolutionary, but really it's been evolutionary of a change in order for us to establish a strong economic footprint within Africa. So let me just start off by saying, I try to answer the question is how did we as an industry grow and have been managed to establish a 97-year presence in Africa, and more specifically in South Africa. To provide the context, in 1923, we built the first Model T in Port Elizabeth. We've grown from a low volume, multi-derivative line, and towards the end of early 2010, we progressed towards a high volume, single platform line, predominantly domestically centric, moving towards exports and leveraging our exports into the UK, Europe. The key enablers, specifically from a South African context, before I talk about the rest of Africa, and why automotive has been such a successful program, representing 7.7% of the current SA GDP, has been for two key reasons. We have a strong automotive policy, a longevity on the policy, plus we have strong trade policies, more specifically around the free trade agreement with Europe. That marriage has created a very successful export program that does not just applicable to Ford, but other large global OEMs that are based in the market. The eventuality of decades worth of effort, work, tweaking, maneuvering around the pillars that are required and some of the infrastructure that we needed. In 2nd of February this year, some of you might be aware, we've actually made an announcement of just over $1 billion investment in South Africa.
In addition to that investment, which is targeting building our future commercial vehicles, we've also managed to develop a strong public-private partnership with the South African government to introduce two new concepts that we as Ford has developed and supported the conceptualization. One is the Shwani Automotive Special Economic Zone, which is a 200-hectare development. And we've also most recently, through President Ramaphosa, the announcement of a high freight deep water port in the Eastern Cape. And the combination of this allows us then to leverage the infrastructure and the base to now maximize the opportunities of the African Free Trade Agreement. So as a collective, you look at where Ford has been in South Africa in the auto sector, you have seen a strong progression towards export-centric, but we needed the base and the foundation to motivate and to justify the astronomical investments that you are currently seeing within the sector. When we look into the African continent, this is where there's a lot of excitement. At the same time, there's a bit of conservativeness in terms of how do we approach. But right now, the opportunity is that there's a motorization rate of 45 vehicles for every 1,000 people in Africa. The average rate globally is 203 vehicles for every 1,000. Africa, and I think it was mentioned by the previous panelist, Edward, is that pretty much a young, rapidly increasing middle class with the low motorization rate. And predominantly, majority of the vehicles coming that are sourced in Africa are used vehicles, about 80%. Vehicles in Africa represent, for 1.3 billion people on the continent, only 1.1 million is new vehicles. And that is estimated to double beyond 2030. As we look and being one of the founding members of the African, the AAM and African Association, in addition, being one of the decision makers and supporting a African expansion from an automotive perspective, what we started to see is very, very interesting and somewhat sometimes exciting sentiments coming out of government from various key markets on the continent, including the African Union with the introduction of the AfCFTA. And what we like about this, the sentiments are around how do we take a current environment that does not have manufacturing, how do we grow the local manufacturing base, and how do we increase localization? But that leads me then to where do we see, what are some of the key enablers? I mean, early this year, the AfCFTA, the African Free Trade Agreement, was ascended into use as of January 2021. What are the AfCFTA going to be able to unlock at a macro level is access to 1.3 billion people, 3 trillion in GDP contribution. And fundamentally, it's going to allow the intra-Africa and the ease of intra-Africa trade across the 54 countries. United Nations Economic Commission anticipate that this is going to double intra-Africa trade. Either way, I am quite optimistic that there is going to be substantial intra-Africa trade. The benefits that we are starting to see is that there's a collective decision-making power. It's African leaders, and we got to give these African leaders a lot of a recognition for the efforts to support the ascension of the AfCFTA to unlock economies of scale. The key enablers that we are working on right now, to support the AfCFTA, we have something called a Pan-African Autopack, identifying key strategic markets in which we could produce components and vehicles, leverage those strategic locations to allow other African markets to participate in the partnership in the value chain, either through some of their economic communities, through the RECs, or some other avenues just because of the geographical location on the east and west. The key enablers is policy stability. We're working with governments to look at how best do we create an inclusion for the auto sector and the value chain. And we're looking at hub and spoke models. How can we create an inclusion where we could produce vehicles in a location like in East Africa and with the surrounding countries export, but also have them participate in the value chain? Mobility and connectivity is critical. The question is, how do we bring those new technologies into a market which is very, very sensitive on pricing? And this is where some of us have been working together with the other industry players on how best to look at some of these introductions so that we could have a true industrialization on the continent. In conclusion, I think I strongly believe Africa will approach an evolutionary strategy, mainly due to the ability to set the right foundation so that they could springboard into a future more industrialized auto sector and in support of moving people freely between borders, equipment, and investments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Darian, and thank you to all the panelists for their opening remarks. Let me sort of ask maybe the first question, and this is more directed toward Darian and Ed. And the question is, you speak to sort of the current landscape that exists in the African market. You emphasize the need for localization, industrialization, and localization of essentially the supply chains. I think there's many success stories on the continent, South Africa, and then more recently Morocco being two of them. How about other parts of the continent? Can you share some insights to where else do you see tremendous opportunity in Africa, other countries, to essentially industrializing, be able to capture the market in terms of the manufacturing of vehicles? So what other parts of Africa do you see sort of as very promising spots for future investment in industrialization and localization of a supply chain that can lead to the manufacture of vehicles?
Well, I don't mind starting. Jerome, in addition to that, in addition to South Africa and Morocco, Southern Africa and Northern Africa, there's opportunities in East and West Africa. The most important part for the auto sector to grow is the ability to develop scale. And the most important thing to develop scale is the presence of a sizable market. And if you look at East Africa or West Africa, you're looking at markets that are at least 300 to 400 million people, and in several major cities, several port cities that would support the lower cost logistics of transportation of parts and finished vehicles into and out of the continent. And several governments that are ready and eager to support localization and industrialization. And as Darren said, the presence of not only regional trade pacts, but the recently implemented African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. So.
A question I have also is, does it matter whether it's cars being manufactured for the local market versus export? I believe in the case of South Africa and BMW, they've exported a lot of their manufactured cars to overseas markets, including, I believe, North America. Does it matter with respect to building that capacity to manufacture, whether it's a strategy built around selling those vehicles to your local market versus exporting them to overseas markets?
Well, there's always an advantage if you could sell to the local market and export. If you look at other recently industrialized automotive nations, I'll take two that I've had the opportunity to work in, South Korea and Mexico. South Korea exports all over the world. And Mexico has trade agreements with, I believe the last count was like 46 countries around the world, specifically for the export of automobiles. So, lean manufacturing principles suggest that it is best to build where your market is. And these are markets that have not had as much investment and focus as much focus as South Africa and Morocco over the last probably 10 years, but South Africa for a much longer period of period of time. But the opportunities are there, sizable markets, and just waiting for investors to take strong interest in.
Darren?
Yeah, I think to unlock the localization, we've had lengthy discussions with many individual governments. I think to Ed's point, first of all, we got to unlock the region. I think West and East Africa has tremendous amount of value and volume and access to the market. If you look at, I think 60% of intra-Africa trade exists within sub-Saharan Africa. East and West has great opportunities, but you got to unlock the volume. Now, if you take some believe, and some African governments believe, we got to localize first before we can get assembly. I hold a different view. I think we got to first ensure we can get the base right. We can support low-level manufacturing, ensure that we have strong government policies to buy local, drive the volume up progressively. And once we get to a certain pivot point, it could unlock the ability to export within regional countries. So if you take East Africa, and if you pick a country, I'm very hesitant to call it a country. We are working with some key countries in Africa, but if you could produce within that market and export within the surrounding markets with robust order policy, you generate economies of scale. Then you can progress further into deepening investment, unleashing the localization value chain. We hold the view that you got to have a strong manufacturing base before we can progress to localization. The supplies will come if we as OEMs enter the market. And same for West Africa. Similar to Edward, I really believe that East and West Africa has a great ability to unlock volume on condition, and it's very critical that we have strong public-private partnership with government. We have a legislative environment that is conducive. Not, sometimes we must be careful that we become too ambitious to want to include everything in the legislation. You want to jump into EVs, you want to jump into new technology. Fundamentally, we don't have the skills or the technical expertise on the ground to build the foundation. And that's why for me, we could go faster later, but we just need to go a bit slower to be more progressive and to unlock economies of scale in Africa.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, changing topics just a little bit and shifting away from automotive and for a moment toward mobility services. Titus, I wanted to ask you if you'd be willing to share with the audience sort of the story of Zembo, which I believe stands for Zero Emission Motorcycle Boda. To me, when I read about the story of Zembo, I got pretty excited, both because it represented sort of novel solutions to micromobility at a very local scale. But it also had an infrastructure element to it as well, where there's an investment in solar charging stations and things like that for electric motorcycles. So I thought maybe you could share the story of Zembo with the audience and talk a little bit about how that path has been, both trying to introduce a new mobility service as well as investing in infrastructure to support that mobility service.
Yes, sure. Thanks for that. The story of Zembo is quite simple and pretty funny if you ask me. But Etienne and Daniel, who, as I mentioned, French and German nationals, they met here. Actually, they met in Tanzania in early 2000, I think 17. And by 2018, they came up with the concept of Zembo. The main reason behind that was Daniel was working a lot here in Uganda and building working for a solar company here and building solar systems across Uganda. And he saw how ubiquitous these motorcycle bodas were, which are essentially motorcycle taxis. This is how people move around the city. The infrastructure of Uganda is not very robust. Therefore, the traffic jam is very persistent. So the fastest way to get around the city is using these motorcycle taxis. Now, the unfortunate bit of this is that all of them are gas powered. They're all they cause a lot of pollution here. Him coming from a background of solar, he said, these all need to turn into EVs. So he discussed it with ATN, and they came up with the concept, designed the bike, and by 2000, we launched in 2009. We launched later on, and are now having around 100. And we're coming close to 130 bikes on the road with 15 charging stations around Greater Kampala. Now, the charging stations are what makes this EV, as you know, the cost of having electric mobility is quite high, especially on the battery side. But when you remove the upfront cost of the battery from the cost of the vehicle, and just have the battery become a service. Sell the battery as a service, then it becomes much cheaper, in which it then works out for the market here. So this is the concept that brings in. This is how the concept of having the stations around Kampala works out. So whenever somebody is riding on this in their electric motorcycle and they're low on energy, they come and swap and switch a battery for one that is fully charged, and they just have to pay for whatever they used. That's much cheaper than them buying the full cost of the battery. So that's the story of Zembo, and we are the first ones in Uganda. And I think if I'm not mistaken, we are the biggest network of charging stations for mobility in Africa. So we're just going to continue building on top of it, and hopefully have all the electric motorcycle. All the boda bodas in Kampala and really Uganda be electric.
Yeah, so, Ed and Darren talked quite a bit about the important role that government plays, investing in automotive. And I think the same may hold true in the mobility space. How much engagement in Kampala or Uganda has there been with the government with respect to those investments in infrastructure? Has that been something that's entirely done by Zembo, or is there a partnership with the local government to make the installation of those 15 charging stations possible?
Yes, regarding the charging stations, it's mostly been us, but we have definitely now partnered with the government, specifically KCCA, which is the council that governs the city, the main city of Kampala. They have invested in a charging station, so we provided all the materials for it, and they fully own it. And we train local youth here that are within KCCA has local youth groups, which they send our way. We train them, and they get to run the station. They learn about the technology. They learn about how to run a full station. So maybe later on, the whole goal is to have the youth group then come from that with the skills that they've gained to go build their own station, if the opportunity arises. So it is the government is definitely has supported us in that way, and we look forward to even deeper integration with the government to really cement this EV infrastructure as part of their plans.
Great, thank you. The next question that I'm going to ask before we turn it over to Q&A with the audience is more directed toward Henry. Henry, being sort of at the forefront of technology development with connectivity and autonomy, having familiarity from an infrastructure perspective, what it takes to deploy signaling technologies to bring order to roads, particularly in the African market, where we have a number of cities that are rapidly densifying, and we really see issues of road congestion, things like that. What do you see as the opportunity for the technology to address essentially some of those challenges to make mobility a more convenient service, if you will, in African cities? And what do you see as sort of the investment strategy that local governments should have with respect to investing in more traditional type infrastructure solutions for managing their roads to leapfrogging right to connectivity and potential autonomy?
My comments to this is smartphone adoption is really a big driver. And that changed a lot of things, and not only just from personal use of smartphone, but also enable better connection between the transportation supply and as well as demand, and not only that, but also gave better information to the travelers and better information to the government agencies in terms of what's happening on the road and how to manage that. And I think this does present. To me, I think this does present a leapfrog solution to transportation management, not only from the government perspective, but also from the trawlers' perspective. And I still go back to the example I used in my opening remark that in the past, when we managed the traffic control devices to reduce the traffic jam, we tend to install a lot of equipment, sensors on the road by means of cameras or loop detectors or radar sensors, trying to detect traffic flow, trying to measure what's happening, and then from that, we can optimize in terms of traffic control devices. And by adoption of smartphones, because of the usage of smartphone, and particularly differentiate those smartphones inside of the vehicle versus those in the household, then we have a better understanding of traffic flow. Just utilize these smartphones as a mobile sensor. So without installing anything on the road, and the vehicle itself become a mobile sensor, and just utilize that, you can actually derive in terms of traffic control, traffic flow performance, and as well as optimize traffic signals. And so the cost to implement those is only really a fraction of the cost to the available technology or existing currently existed. And that gave you a lot of advantages, and one of these is not only you don't need to install, but also this gives you access to a large area. It's because it's spread out. It's not really concentrated just a couple of intersections, and now you have a large area which you can manage to reduce the congestion. So I do think this technology will present some revolutionary type of solutions, just like landline telephone network, and it's not going to be in most of the developing countries. They probably not going to be utilized. Instead, people will tend to use use mobile phones, and to a certain extent in the mobility world, I think this will be happening as well. And there are some of these technologies will leapfrog to the new situation.
Okay, great. Thank you, Henry. Okay, so I'm going to take a few questions from the audience. We already have a few questions that have been populated on the Q&A panel. So I'm going to pick one or two and then kind of go from there. So the first one is a question with respect to ride-hailing companies and ride-hailing services in African communities. Particularly the question that the attendee has is given the dominance of informal transit, does ride-hailing really match up with the reality on the ground in African communities? What is the potential for ride-hailing? What are some of the challenges that are there, given that informal transit culture that may exist in many communities on the continent? So that's anyone is free to answer that.
I can touch on that a bit. One thing about the ride hailing, and this is something that has worked in not worked, but rather it's been implemented here in Uganda, specifically Kampala. Uber's here. There's also an app called SafeBoda, which is essentially an Uber specific for motorcycle taxis. The way the motorcycle taxis work today without the ride-hailing apps is that you come out to the street, or maybe somebody that has a motorcycle right by where you live, and you call them, or you go out to the street, you wave your hand, and they come pick you up, and you go where you need to go. There is and one thing about there's a host of problems that come along with that. One being safety, the other being the pricing. You can, unless you are a local, unless you are somebody that has done the route before, you wouldn't know the price of that route, whatever route you are taking. What these ride-hailing apps provide is that sense of price discovery, so you know exactly what the price is for that ride. The other thing is, of course, safety. Which is what they usually, guarantee first before even the price, is the guaranteeing of safety, knowing that you're riding with somebody who is being who has a GPS tracker on them and who is also known by the ride-hailing company. So they definitely bring some organization within this informal market, and it's something that we have also ourselves on us from Zembo's standpoint. We've gone out, we've reached out to these companies and really tried to get more bikes within that type of setting versus the informal side, as the operations of these the operational guidelines of these hailing apps is a little more stricter than the informal. So you did risk having an electric bike, which is novel, to end up in an unfortunate situation. So I think they definitely provide those two things. Of course, it is also, they still.
We'll just give Titus a moment to come back. All right, I'm gonna just take another question from. Yeah, go ahead, Henry. If you'd like to share that, please. By all means.
I can add to Titus. Yeah, I think I agree with Titus, and I would draw a comparison between the informal transit situation sort of 10 years ago in China versus right now in China. And 10 years ago, before Didi emerged into the market, what you will see is this black market, and people actually, without any formalization, without any apps, they will go into these to get the ride, to these drivers to get the ride. So a lot of safety issues emerged, and with adoption of cell phone, mobile internet, really, I think, connect these demand and supplies and make this mobility as a service better. And this will, again, this will have a culture shift as well. And right now in China, it's probably very difficult for you to just to get the informal transit, to just walk to somebody and somebody just at the roadside to get a ride. You just have to utilize some sort of apps and to do so. So I think this will, again, this will stimulate and also encourage the culture shift to mobility as a service.
Okay, great. One of the questions that the attendees posed was the translation of ride-hailing solutions for mobility from urban areas to more rural areas of Africa. Certainly here in North America, I think ride-hailing companies like Uber and others first penetrated more denser urban areas to essentially offset some of the costs of their infrastructure, and have only recently begun to really go beyond some of these more urban service areas. What is the case of Africa? How far can mobility services like ride-hailing sort of get outside of the cities and benefit more rural communities in African countries? Any thoughts on that?
Well, Jerome, what I would add is that, the African continent is becoming urbanized, just like many parts of the world as well. And what's essential is having the right solution, whether it's a heavily urban market, whether it's a last mile solution, or whether there's a rural market. And I think the technology, brought on by apps, et cetera, is just creating an opportunity for entrepreneurs to deliver the right solution for that particular customer's need and that particular environment that they're in, whether it be rural, last mile, or urban.
Great.
To me, I think for ride-hailing companies, these are for-profit companies. It will be difficult for them to penetrate these really rural areas because profitability. So I think in the rural area, the government investment from public investment on those is still, or subsidized such service will be still critical to provide service and to provide access for people to the road network.
Yeah, I agree with Henry on this one, especially when you start progressing out of these main metropolitans. The volume, the business equation for the individual small entrepreneur who's going to have to create these solutions for such long distances to move out. I think maybe it's going to be up to a creative entrepreneur to provide that, but government policy, government legislation, moving people, high volume of people is going to probably be a better solution. But individual mobility is just going to be very tough. I mean, I've been in a few countries now within Africa. While you're in the center, you've got huge volumes. You may have infrastructure challenges in terms of traffic and in terms of congestion. But as you move to the outskirts, it just leans out significantly. And so that individual entrepreneur's business equation may need to have other support, especially government support.
It's great input on that. Okay, another question from the audience, and this changes gears a little bit and moves us more into the realm of financing. What does the panel believe, is the future for alternative financial instruments in Africa? Specifically, the panelist mentions cryptocurrencies. Given the very tax-savvy young population in many African countries, we do see Bitcoin in use in certain parts of the African market. But can you speak broadly in terms of the role of any sort of cryptocurrency, essentially reinforcing some of the currencies on the continent and being integral to mobility solutions going forward? Do you also see opportunities for blockchain in your industry, which goes beyond, now financing, maybe more as a trust network, say between, contracts between suppliers and things like that? Can you speak to cryptocurrencies and blockchain and the opportunities that exist in Africa for their use?
I'm going to come in first, and I'm sure the panelists will add to this, but I think financing is incredibly critical. North of South African borders, the ability for individuals to fund is very difficult, to get credit, even to be able to acknowledge credit. In addition, is there dispute mechanisms in play through default? And so this variability and risk becomes really apparent and really difficult for banking institutions and other forms of financing opportunities. As part of some of the discussions that I'm having with key banking leaders and execs around what do we do in Africa, specifically around the West and East Africa, without unlocking financing, I don't think so you can unlock economies of scale. I believe those are critical towards scale. The challenge is how do we figure out the financing options? Most of the financing options now, when you have to incorporate risk and you have to incorporate the variability of consistency and the uncertainty of accountability and a scheduled payment regimen, the interest payments are very high. I would really love to find solutions as to how do we overcome this, because in my sector and other sectors, it will actually help with the industrialization and it will be a catalyst. So from that perspective, at 100,000 foot level, I need the financing. We're really looking for options as to how this could be. Could it be a solution internally or externally? I don't have a position in terms of crypto as to which mechanism would be, but we really need to unlock. That would be really the next level to allow the progression of financing. Similar to South Africa, we have financing. We could see what has happened. Africa is just becoming, it's the next level that is just uncertain, and we're looking for as to how do we finance product.
Yeah, and I think that, experiences that we've seen also in other parts of the world where blockchain becomes sort of an underlying infrastructure for providing sort of a platform for financing, particularly smaller but aggregated financing that gets to scale. Particularly filling vacuums that are often left in countries that may not have a central bank, for example, and the need to invest in infrastructure and things like that. So I agree that there's probably an exciting opportunity there to look at these technologies, these fintech sort of solutions to bring in financing to the equation. I don't know, Titus or Henry, from a technology perspective, how those innovations may be tied directly to these mobility service solutions. Do you see me there?
From a technology standpoint, I don't know. I don't think there will be much of it, but as Darren mentioned, it's going to be it could be useful in the financing side. As again, echoing Darren, it's very, 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 very hard to find credit north of South Africa because it's just it's a very, very primitive financial sector here. But I think it will get opened up as more secured types of loans are able to be given out. It's just you can't walk into a bank and get a loan as easy as you may be able to elsewhere. It's really, really hard to do that. But if cryptocurrencies do provide some type of security, or at least overstep, leapfrog some part of the financial setup here, in which it's easier to give out a loan and know that this is the, at least read or give out a loan to somebody where you know that this is the chance that they'll pay back. But there is just so many gaps here in giving out loans that you prefer not to give out your bike to somebody. On that, we are financing the bikes, although we have partners who help us with that. But we also do in-house financing for bikes. Motorcycle taxi drivers do not have the money to do it, so we have to finance them. So as part of that, we do our credit check, which is essentially just go ask who knows them and who is the village council there who can guarantee them. Not very similar to other ways that at least credit is done, and it's a very, very primitive way to give out credit, and it can be but if cryptocurrencies in whatever solution comes out of them is able to offer a solution to open up credit more, then without increasing risk or really de-risking the portfolio, then yes, I think it has a huge role to play in the future of transportation here.
Great.
Yes.
Darren.
Hey, sorry, Prof. Just a point to raise in addition to what Titus has said. If you looked at the latest United Nations report on used vehicles, 14 million vehicles were sold by 2014, 16, I think 17, averaging $8,300 a vehicle. So there is interest. There are revenue opportunities for financial institutions. I think the ability to move away from the current model in terms of, and to be able to be more open to a different form of risk could be an opportunity for these financial institutions to support both business, but also to generate the revenues that they need, trying to accommodate the current volatility and the current cultural differences within on credit in Africa.
Great.
And Jerome, to your question on, really brief. I think part of the answer lies somewhere in what Elon Musk is doing. I'm really curious. I'm intrigued by his investment in Bitcoin. He's said he's going to accept him for Tesla purchases, and part of his rationale being to reduce foreign exchange risk within a supply chain. So I plan to follow closely and learn more about what he's up to.
That's a great example, looking at sort of a trendsetter company in the EV market, and their dabble in sort of these cryptocurrencies. So great point. Henry, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just want to add a quick point that this may not related with finance itself, but it does relate to mobile pay. Mobile pay is a critical enabler for mobility as a service, and I'm sure Zemba will have experienced that how you deal with mobile pay for your company. that will be very, very important. And for the mobility as a service in terms of vehicle itself, it's also very important, because you don't want a driver to put a bag of money in their car and it become it's not very safe. So mobile pay is actually a critical enabler for that.
Is a great point, and I think we've seen that also in countries like China, right? Where that's become sort of the standard way of transacting, between parties. All right, so changing gears a little bit. Question toward Darren and Ed from an automotive perspective. Climate change. Increasing emphasis being placed on governments across the world trying to cut their CO2 emissions. Clearly, the mobility sector today does contribute significant greenhouse gases. What do you see with respect to Africa's future, the adoption of the automobile? Do you see internal combustion engines being sort of the mainstay vehicle, or do you see opportunities for Africa to follow other parts of the world, including the United States, in the adoption of EV? Once you go toward EV, though, you have increasing dependence now on an electrical grid. So it does beg questions around sort of the resiliency of providing those electrical services. What do you see as the path forward as Africa becomes more of an automotive market?
Yeah, I think so. Let's take this in two ways. So we look at our location. So we've in the February 2nd announcement, we've announced that we will be going into what we call island mode, where we will be carbon neutral and utility free from 2024, the entire operation within South Africa. Within Africa, I think it's going to be a while before we absorb electrical vehicles or some solution at scale. The challenge would be not necessarily the ability to include. Sometimes there are infrastructure issues, both in terms of the generation and also the ability of physical infrastructure to be able to charge. But you also have the ability on the price point for now. So for now, I would see ICE, the internal combustible engine, to be predominantly a solution for Africa. It is a price point, and if you look at the importation, one of the things that we've been debating, as EVs become more affordable, the importation of used vehicles could help the introduction of EVs into Africa. Now, I don't know what that's going to look like. We don't have a feel of a vision of what that's going to be, but there are certain opportunities through that segmentation to provide an affordability. Right now, the sensitivity is price. You've got people in the market that would potentially buy these vehicles, but the options could be a hybrid model. It's a bit more expensive, but at least it allows the mitigation of infrastructure challenges, utility generation. So especially with long distances that we travel between your residence and your work environment, or between cities, it could, Pretoria to Gauteng is about 70 kilometers. So you could have those solutions. I still think we're going to be dependent on ICE vehicles for a little while. But Ford has made announcements globally with regards to the conclusion and the end of internal combustible engine in the future. But I do believe the emerging markets are still going to absorb this. Their motivation is less around the technology, but more around affordability.
Ed, would you like to share as well?
Yes, I agree with Darren when you specifically, especially when you speak about personal use vehicles, there is going to be a price point challenge. However, when you look at the commercial vehicle segment, whether it's ride hailing or ride sharing vehicles or commercial trucks, commercial light vehicles, those purchase decisions tend to look at more of total ownership cost over time. The uptime of those vehicles is significantly higher than a personal use vehicle, which typically sits parked in a garage or at a parking space where you're at work 90 to 95% of the time. So when you have higher uptime and you're looking at an equation based on total ownership experience, with lower maintenance costs, lower fuel costs, and you're looking at a cost of batteries, which continues to decline. I think there are specific markets on the continent that are more ripe for EVs than others. You just have to, do the homework to select the right geographies and select the right sectors. And the adoption period is going to be slow, just as it's been everywhere else in the world. But I think they are still the future, even on the African continent.
Does Africa have an advantage with respect to natural resources that go into the manufacture of electric vehicle? You talked before about localized supply chains and things like that. Are there materials in Africa that are quite accessible from a natural resource perspective that then would feed a localized supply chain that would feed the EV market in Africa?
Yeah, so that's the investigation, and I think I missed this out in my earlier address. There is opportunity for material. We have the ability, we have a supply base that could localize. Could we absorb at scale? So from my perspective and from our perspective as a business, it's the scalability that's critical in order to have a business equation for production. However, here's an interesting position that we're working with governments and we're working on the policy side, is how do we take this, how do we bring scalability to markets that will sell some vehicles, but not substantial amount? And the one opportunity has been, why don't we produce in these markets with the support of a strong legislative environment? We have, Africa has really good trading agreements and the ability to move product out of the continent. Predominantly, you have the African Growth and Opportunity Act with the US, you have the European Union Economic Partnership Agreement, and there's other agreements that are being discussed. Take that, produce it locally and export. And that could help close the gap for scalability. And that's something that I'm really interested in. We are really interested to explore. And we've already engaged governments. I got to be very careful on the calling out a country or countries. But that seems to have a lot of momentum. If we can get to 30, 40,000 volume, that provides the ability to leverage those volumes for local industry. And really, to me, that's the low-hanging fruit, and that's what we're working on. And that's what I'm focusing on, is to find a complementary approach between exports and domestic volumes for alternative energies. In the traditional vehicle, it's normally you would go the other way. You would take the local support, local domestic market, offset your overheads, and use the base for export.
Right. Great point. Others want to share on that?
I think I want to add on what Edward said. It's when we look with regards to commercial vehicles, these are things that would definitely incentivize the local producers, right? We have, for example, here in Uganda, we have producers of batteries, but they mostly focus on lead acid, or this is the only focus that they do. I don't even think they do dry cell. But with the introduction of buses coming from Kira Motors, along with other products that they're building that are strictly lithium ion, if I'm not mistaken, this should incentivize the local manufacturers to invest into the technology of lithium ion. This have been also our argument with the government here in regards to importing of lithium ion batteries to Uganda. Again, it's the technology transfer, but again, at the same time, it's also an incentive for the local manufacturers to invest into this as the market grows. So once the market then reaches a point where they see that it makes economic sense, then they would easily make that switch or turn on that switch to produce it locally, which I'm sure could be much cheaper than having it transferred from China.
Great. Thank you, Titus. So just being cognizant of time, I think this brings us to a close of the panel. So I wanted to say thank you to the four panelists. This was an absolutely outstanding discussion. I learned a lot. I feel the audience, through their questions, was able to really come away with a deeper understanding of the opportunities that exist in Africa. So to me, it sounds like there's tremendous opportunity for both evolutionary and revolutionary adoption of mobility services in Africa. So Fantastic sharing all your thoughts on that question today. So thank you very, very much. And thank you particularly to Ed, Darren, and Titus, who I believe it's evening your time in Africa today, right now. So thank you for staying up late for us. So I'm going to turn it over now to Laura, who's going to just close this panel and this morning's session for the conference. Laura?
So thank you to everyone. It was a very fascinating 2 days, and I'm excited for the next 2 days. Can you hear me? I've actually sat in on all the panels and I've learned a lot, and I see many syntheses among the topics. Just a little bit about me. I'm Associate Director of the African Studies Center and Professor of Law at the University of Michigan Law School. I also designed a course at the law school that teaches on Africa and global legal system. So the students learn a lot of the background legal rules and institutions that touch upon and facilitate a lot of the issues that we've heard of over the several 2 days, for example, intellectual property, financial regulation, and so forth. The African Studies Center, I would encourage all the participants, if you have not already, look into the African Studies Center. We're under the International Institute at the University of Michigan. So if you go to the International Institute's website, there will be links to the regional centers, and you'll see Africa there. We do a number of activities, support exchanges between African institutions and our institution. Not only institutional exchanges, faculty exchanges, scholar exchanges, student exchanges. We give seed grants to faculty in all fields, STEM to humanities, social sciences, to fund seed projects that collaborate with African scholars and often bring also students in into those projects. We also influence curriculum development at the University of Michigan. I'm proud to say that I think we have a very rich and growing offering of Africa-related courses now at the law school, including law school, which I'm proud of. And I'll put one final plug about African studies. If you're participating in this conference today, there's a 30% discount for the African Perspectives book series. And that expires on February 28th. So you can go to the website and take a look at the books that are on offer and see if you would like to get any during this discount period. I think the last 2 days have been fascinating, and the overarching theme that I take away is that we're pushing toward African solutions to African problems, and the approach that we're desiring and aiming for is an approach that collaboration, for sure, a collaboration that is mutual, and a collaboration that drops all the assumptions that Africa should follow the rest of the world. As was mentioned in the shooting panel, a lot of the solutions that would work elsewhere would not work in Africa. Africans know firsthand their problems, and so as scholars and as industrialists and policymakers, we should approach Africa with a perspective that we learn what the particular problems are from them, and we offer the skills that we have and the capacity building, but we don't serve as a leader. We're partners, and maybe even sometimes, as Baba Rediet suggested, sometimes followers. We do not need to be the hero of the story. It's a new century for Africa. I thought it was fascinating how, yesterday's discussion of fintech converged with today's discussion, the end of this discussion on transportation. Financing for these different technologies is going to be critical. And I see, how you can work together with people who are doing fintech and transportation. Of course, law will come in, business will come into play. we saw, we learned about the Chessy University and opportunities for our students to go there and vice versa for them to come here. Opportunities for in transportation, for green technology, for automation, for a shift from informal sector to the formal sector, the role of the government in providing some of these public goods that arise in the transportation sector, appropriate policies. Tomorrow, which I'm also very excited about, tomorrow we will have higher education and heritage. So the first panel, moderated by Andres, Andres Kotzi, the Director of African Studies, will investigate exchanges, between Africa and the United States, which we are well placed to participate in. We have a long history. And then the second panel will be moderated by the former ambassador to the new nation of South Sudan, Susan Page. She will talk about the issue of returning African heritage and the issues that arise in that context. So I look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. I will certainly be here, and have a wonderful evening. And thank you again to everyone who made this possible, the provost, the president's office, African Studies, all the moderators, all the speakers, all the students, everyone of the audience. Thank you, and we'll see you tomorrow.